For tonight, Tuesday, October 14th, we'll begin with agenda item number 1, which is Selectmen announcements and updates. And I know Selectman DeWitt, as she does every week, has a few updates for us.
Okay, on Thursday, starting at 4 in the afternoon till 9 o'clock, the Brookline Interactive Group, which is public access television for Brookline, will be showcasing their new productions with live studio demonstrations and activities for all ages, beginning with the Bee Bear Book Club at 4 p.m., which is a children's program. Later, there'll be a live cooking demonstration at 6:30, and there will be much more. And as a little bit of a preview, we will be introducing and meeting tonight Kathy Bisbee, the new executive director of BIG, who will start in December. There's still a couple of weeks of farmers markets. Don't forget, I actually had great fresh corn from last Thursday, so it's still good local seasonal produce, cheeses, prepared foods, flowers and plants, and more. On Monday, there will be, that is October the 20th, the Selectmen will hold a second public hearing on the report of the Override Study Committee. It will be in the morning in this room, Selectmen's hearing room, starting at 9 a.m. And also next week is Brookline Sister City Week. The mayor of Quezalhuaque, which is in Nicaragua, which is Brookline's sister city, will be coming with other members of his staff. And there are a number of events that have to do with this. On Monday the 20th, there will be music at the Coolidge Corner Theater featuring Nicaraguan poet and also holder of the French Legion of Honor, Vidaluz Meneses, and traditional Latin music. On the 22nd, there will be a forum on chronic kidney disease of unknown origin at Brookline High School in the MLK room at 7 p.m. This is sponsored by Brookline Adult and Community Education, and it's important to know that Brookline Sister City volunteers have been working for a number of years with local health officials to identify the cause and possible treatment for this chronic condition, which affects people in Nicaragua as well as Western Central America. And so it should be a very interesting discussion. On the 23rd at 6:30 p.m., there's a celebration at the Vine Ripe Grill. Governor Michael Dukakis will be there, and Congressman Joe Kennedy will be the keynote speaker. And also there will be Latin American music. So a number of different events celebrating our relationship with Quezalhuaque, which has been, gosh, I was trying to remember how long it is. 25 years, 30 years maybe? Long time.
I think it's 20 or
27. 27 is the number. Thank you, that helped. And finally, another reminder, Public Health Department will be holding free flu clinics on Tuesday, October 28th at the Brookline Senior Center from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. and on Wednesday, October 29th at Baker School from 5 p.m. to 7 p.m.
Thank you, Selectman DeWitt. Any other announcements from members of the Board of Selectmen?
I had two updates about activities I partook in over the weekend. On Saturday, I had the pleasure of speaking at the Second Saturday Senior Social, which is a BCAN connected forum about the Fall Town Meeting warrant and also about the override. And we had a lively conversation. I think everybody left better informed, so that was a success. And then on Sunday, I represented the board at the BAA Half Marathon and was approached by several race organizers and athletes commending the town on the town staff's helpfulness in facilitating the race, and want to especially thank the DPW, the police department, and the fire department for really stepping up and helping the race go off without a hitch. So,
great. Thank you. Selectman Daly.
Yeah, can I just add, the Senior Center Gala is on the 29th of this month, Wednesday, and So just over 2 weeks from now. And it's always a wonderful event, and it's a very, very important fundraiser for the senior center to be able to provide all the services they do to the many people that go there. So I think there are still tickets available, and people should contact the senior center because it's very fun as well.
It sure is. Anything further? Thank you. We do have one person signed up for public comment tonight, and I know Mr. Conquest is here. Please.
Good evening. Arthur Conquest. I was so busy listening to Miles Davis last week that I kind of skipped getting into line. So by the time it was called to sort of the other line got cut off, I was off in another world, but sorry about that. But I do have something that I want to say. The promotion of Dr. Jelenu to the position as Director of Diversity, Inclusion, and the Community Relations Department is a crude allusion and an illustration of the profundity and the craftiness that racism, which permeates this community, has taken. And just for the record, I was the individual last week who shouted, "It's about time." And I think it's in the right direction, but I also think that the town has a long, long, long way to go. The linchpin of Brooks Ames in my campaign for a seat on the Board of Selectmen last spring was the deplorable record this community has exhibited towards diversity by having 25 white department heads. Your response, 43 years after Dr. Jelenu's black predecessor, Richard Fisher, the first black department head in Brookline's history, who resigned after just 6 months in his position, is to hire another black man, again, in the same position as Dr. Fisher, but to a department that includes just half a staff person and with almost no power. The appointment illustrates the lack of racial progress the town of Brookline has achieved in almost half a century. On slave plantations, the white master took the choice meats, while the white slaves received the remnants, the throwaways. If the master's staff killed a pig, the master had the sumptuous pork chops, while the slaves received the pig's guts and intestines, also known as chitlins. The pig's tails, its feet, and its lips. The new Diversity, Inclusion, and Community Relations Department are the chitlins of the Brookline town government. It is exactly why 4 new members of the Diversity Commission, which includes the first Latina to head the commission in the town's government, resigned, plus a black who has stated that she will not apply for the new commission that you are seeking applicants for. It's all insulting nonsense, and is just another example of the exhibit that exhibits so clearly that you just don't see us as human beings. You don't see black people as really members of this community. The only thing that was missing from last week's announcement to appoint Dr. Jelenu to be the director of the new diversity department was a mop and a pail.
Disagree strongly with your comments, but we'll move on. Move to the miscellaneous calendar, and the first item for consideration is the question of approving the minutes of October 7th. Anybody have any proposed revisions or additions?
I do.
I do too.
Yeah, I do.
Pass those along to Kate, and I'll move that we approve the minutes of the October 7th meeting of the Board of Selectmen as revised. All those in favor say aye. Selectman DeWitt. I'm sorry, Selectman. Sorry, Selectman Daley.
Aye.
Selectman Daley, we go in order of seniority. Selectman Daley, Selectman DeWitt.
Aye.
Selectman Waschinsky.
Aye.
Selectman Franco.
Aye.
And the chair votes aye. Thank you. Next, we have the question of authorizing the one-time use of $34,000 from the BAA, the Boston Athletic Association Fund, to complete the Waldstein Park building renovation by Robichaud Construction And the further question of approving and executing an amendment in the amount of $34,000 in connection with the work performed by Robichaux Construction at Waldstein Park. And yes, it's good to see you, Ray. Please tell us.
Ray Masak, Building Department. After the bid, we were informed of this additional funding. And basically, this change order incorporates the bid alternates. The bid alternates do not affect the low bid. A.J. Robichaux with the alternates was still the low bidder. There are 3 alternates: a new roof, removing the paint from the building, which I think will really enhance the park, to bring it back to the brick, as well as new ceilings in the bathrooms. There's wood ceilings now, and we put drywall ceilings back up. Really just enhancements to the building, if approved.
Questions from board members? I want to thank whoever was foresighted enough to know that we would want to see the information about the BAA account and what it's been spent on before, and this seems...
Mr. Cronin, I bet.
Thank you, Mr. Cronin. It was useful information, and I was glad it was there, and it convinced me that this is an appropriate use for those funds. Any other questions or comments from board members? No? Okay. Well, I'm going to first move that we authorize the one-time use of $34,000 from the BAA fund to complete the Waldstein Park building renovations by Robichaux Construction. All in favor say aye. Selectman Daley?
Aye.
Selectman DeWitt?
Aye.
Selectman Waschinsky?
Aye.
Selectman Franco?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. And further move that we approve and execute an amendment in the amount of $34,000 in connection with work performed by Robichaux Construction at Waldstein Park renovation. All in favor say aye. Selectman Daley?
Aye.
Selectman DeWitt?
Aye.
Selectman Waschinsky?
Aye.
Selectman Franco?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. And we can move on now to the question of approving a contract amendment in the amount of $4,100 with Beta Group in connection with engineering peer review services at Chestnut Hill Realty's application for a comprehensive permit. And yes, Ms. Allison.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Allison Steinfeld, Planning Director. I'm respectfully requesting that you authorize an amendment to complete peer review of traffic and primarily stormwater relative to Chestnut Hill Realty's application. This contract amendment is specifically to review public comments made at a recent public hearing. We expect that it will cost $4,100, and the applicant has agreed to pay for this. Thank you.
Selectman DeWitt.
Yeah, I just want to be sure. We've got a letter from the DPW with regard to proposed conditions, and I'm not clear. Is this work already performed, or is it going to be performed?
The work is essentially completed, and it will be presented on Tuesday, the 20th, at a public hearing.
Okay, so in effect, it's too late to modify the scope.
Absolutely not. It's not, well, it's too late to modify the scope, but it's certainly not too late to address conditions.
Okay, because in the DPW letter, and I think in conversations among members of this board, we've discussed the complete streets planning process, and I know that at the meeting of the ZBA, when the proposal for Independence Drive first was introduced, it was very clear that it was a piecemeal kind of approach. And so I'm very concerned, and maybe this is a Mr. Ditto question, I don't want to put you on the spot, Ms. Steinfeld, about how we will be sure that the recommended conditions that the DPW has proposed will actually be incorporated. And I wasn't clear whether this excludes that or just is sort of separate but not the same as, just, I'm confused.
Well, I'll certainly be glad to defer to Mr. Ditto, but I do want to comment that town staff, in conjunction with consultants, are working very hard to identify a very rigorous list of conditions if and when the ZBA approves the application subject to conditions. That means input from peer reviewers, from all town staff, and other consultants. So I can assure you that the conditions will be rigorous. And if you'd like to address some questions to Mr. Ditto,
Sure.
I'll be happy to defer to him.
Thank you.
That comment was directed at making sure that the developer understands that he's responsible for the cost for the design of whatever plan we generate, as well as the cost for constructing that. It was no way intended to have any preconceived notion of what that design would be.
Okay.
Selectman Waschinsky.
So, just to make it clear, there was a particular design presented to the ZBA. We're not committing to that design or any other particular design. Whatever changes to Independence Drive may occur will go through a public process. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay.
Selectman Daley?
Yeah, my question, I believe, is for Ms. Steinfeld. I've had some of the neighbors out in that area who are very concerned about the traffic impacts that, a large-scale expansion on the Hancock Village site will have on the area. And I've had people suggest to me that we should go beyond a peer review process and consider, because as my understanding is, if it's a peer review, they have to just look at the material provided to them by the developer and the methodology provided by the developer. And is it, I'm wondering what your thoughts are, if there would be any value to us having some independent look at traffic issues in that area, not simply limited to a peer review, but a little more broader look.
Well, in terms of the peer review, you're correct. The consultant is hired to review the methodology and the information generated by the applicant's consultant. But in several cases, both in terms of stormwater and traffic, our consultant, the peer reviewer, asked for additional information, questioned certain assumptions, and the applicant's consultant responded. In terms of hiring another consultant, to be quite honest with you, I don't think it would be cost-effective in that the information is the information. I mean, the methodologies are established by engineering agencies that any respectable engineer is going to have to follow. The data is the data. There are only so many accidents, fortunately, and the assumptions have been reviewed. So I do not think it would be cost-effective. Peer review has served a purpose.
Okay. Can I ask Mr. Ditto, as the traffic expert, sort of the same question? Do you see any areas that you feel like we're not getting full information or we could benefit from further review here?
Yeah, I think I have to agree with Allison on this, in that both the consultants, the developer's consultant and our town consultant agree that the numbers are valid numbers. And that's the standard. That's the boilerplate for moving forward. And I don't think there's going to be any drastic difference in those numbers. So the conclusions ultimately will be the same.
And in terms of the water runoff, I know a lot of the neighbors have said to me that this pudding stone actually has a lot of water in it. Is that right? Or is it that water gets displaced when there's drilling or blasting of the pudding stone? And so there's a great deal of concern about that. Is that something that we should be exploring more thoroughly?
Pudding stone does have a lot of what they call fissures in them, and that's basically cracks that water can get and migrate. When I reviewed the stormwater and saw what the pre and post runoff was, and it was a change for the better for the butters, in that the post runoff is less than the pre runoff. So I feel comfortable, even if there were water transmitted through the bedrock, if you will, it wouldn't exceed what's going to be taken out.
Okay.
Selectman DeWitt?
I have a follow-up. I think this is for Mr. Ditto. I am concerned, and I don't see that it's included in this contract with Beta, that we have not fully and exhaustively investigated the impact of blasting. My understanding is that much of Hancock Village is sitting on rock outcrop. And as you've just said, it's if it's pudding stone, it is actually subject to sliding and moving, a lot of movement. And I'm feeling that we do not have enough information. Beta didn't really address it very aggressively. I don't know if they even have the right qualifications. But I would really like to be reassured that blasting, particularly taking down a very substantial outcrop of pudding stone, will not damage either the existing units of Hancock Village or the single-family abutting homes. I don't feel reassured about that at all.
Okay, I'm just going to throw some out there and then turn it over to Chief Ford.
Sure.
I know that this is going way back, when we built the water garage down on Netherlands Road, you remember the Dutch house?
Yep.
Very, very fragile house.
Yep, I remember that well.
In that situation, we did a pre-blast survey as well as setting up seismic monitors at the boundary.
And I believe on Fisher Hill, we also had seismic monitors.
Right.
Neither of which were said to be on pudding stone outcrops.
Right. So to the extent of my knowledge on blasting, that's my understanding that, you gain that pre-blasting survey, detail any cracks in the homes that are going to be affected.
So would that become a condition rather than, I think we would have a hard time knowing how to articulate the conditions without a proper engineering.
Right. I think that's
Study.
almost standard practice.
Yeah, I believe it's a condition that the building department would impose as part of their demolition permit. Those kind of surveys, in my experience, are just routine whenever there's blasting.
One of the other things.
Maybe the chief has
If I may
something to add.
quickly, and I'll back up, it's a requirement under CMR 527. They have to do a blasting analysis and a survey. So that it's a requirement under law.
Okay, but I guess what I'm trying to say is, let me put it to you this way. If the project goes forward and we don't have any data about the impact of blasting, then the consequences of blasting are at this time unknown, and I don't know what other than some sort of regulatory conditions, which I'm sure are meant to be very understand what the impact of blasting could be on any of the existing structures, none of which are built to earthquake standards.
One of the other things that the abutters have expressed concern about, and I share your concern about foundations and walls and the structure, single-family structures themselves, one of the other things that the abutters have made abundantly clear to me is they're concerned about the impact of blasting on utility lines, particularly gas lines. So I understand that a survey, a pre-blasting survey is required. I would hope we would also be able to collect some information about potential impact on gas lines and utility lines.
And so I guess really where I'm coming from is, before a building permit is issued with following regulations, I would like to know whether there should be significant conditions with regard to blasting. And I don't feel that we have that data at this time, but I could be missing something.
Let me begin by saying that blasting operations are not my forte. It's not something that we run into on a regular basis. In the past, in the town of Brookline, how the fire department has handled it is we follow 527 CMR, Section 13, and Mass General Law, Chapter 148, which both speak to blasting and explosives. Pre-blast survey is done in every structure up to 250 feet away, or within 250 feet of the blasting area. That, again, is by law. We require fire details for all blasting operations. The contractor has to come into fire prevention and get a blasting permit. We review the codes with them and also with our detail personnel. But going into the regulations themselves, which are about that thick, in 527, just to answer a couple of quick questions, they have to provide a blast analysis. Before conducting blast, the blaster shall conduct a blast analysis of overall factors affecting the blasting operations. This analysis shall consider adjacent area structures, buildings, building foundations, utilities, including gas and water supply lines, septic systems, swimming pools, and area geology within 250 feet of the center of the blast site, and the identification of commercial equipment such as computers, electron microscopes, laser equipment, relays, etc., that are sensitive to blast operations. It goes on with a lot of other information. We also have to have a blast design plan provided to us, and they have to have it, and there has to be pre-blast inspections where they go out and they have to give at least 3 times notice to each resident. They go in, they take pictures, they take measurements, they look at all the structures, they look at the exterior of the home, they look at the interior, they mark down any kind of faults that are pre-existing before the blast operation. Now, from what I've found in 527, this is all incumbent on them. Now, whether we should, and it includes seismic information that they have to get relative to the geology and how it's going to affect things. Now, should we have the information on our own? Should we rely on the information provided by the blaster? If we have a say, I certainly would feel more comfortable that we had some say in it, whether we can get some assistance from the fire marshal's office or require an independent blast analysis be done, preferably paid for by the developer. I think that would be prudent on us to get all the information we can get.
I have to say, Chief, it's very reassuring to hear the procedures once it is permitted to go forward, which is to say, my concern is before that. What I would like to know is whether or not there is sufficient evidence that the blasting would be so destructive that there should not be any. And I don't know how to impose a condition saying thou shalt not blast without an engineering study of the impacts of blasting.
I certainly think that we would have to have that analysis done to see if it falls in that that realm, that someone with the proper credentials would say this is totally beyond what we want to do, or what the outcome would be.
Okay, and part of what I'm talking about is not just the impact on the abutters, but the existing buildings that are very close to this outcrop that is proposed to be blasted, that were built in the 40s, and they clearly were not designed to have resistance to earthquake, which is probably what blasting feels like in a building from the 40s. Anyway.
The one thing that might come into play there is I believe the, CMR speaks to damage to other properties, not of the person who's doing the blasting of that project. Right. So we might not have a say if they, excuse me, if they met all the requirements, but their closest building was going to get damaged. They may be able to say, we're okay with that, we'll fix it. It's not someone outside their organization. Okay. So it would really be the, from what I understand, the abutters that are within 250 feet.
Right.
I think Mr. Kleckner would like to reassure us on this point.
Yeah, well, I'm learning a bit too on the blasting, and I'm hearing the extensive concerns. You know, I think we've all been understanding that the state regulations are very rigid, but what I'm hearing is we probably need some risk analysis up front in order to assure ourselves that the regulations will be sufficient, or perhaps we may need other conditions or whatever. So we meet regularly as a staff, and I can assure you this week we'll take that up and make that consideration.
I certainly would feel more comfortable that we had the information coming from someone that we knew.
And Chief, I really appreciate that you are knowledgeable about blasting. That's very reassuring to me, but where I'm concerned is whether or not they get permission to go forward and then have the analysis done. I'm worrying more about whether there should be a condition that could be a condition saying don't blast if it were to be high risk. So that's the question I'm proposing. Thank you.
Selectman Waschinsky?
The other question I would like to suggest that you include in your analysis is the question of, is the 250 feet radius sufficient given the conditions on the site? Because it seems to me that's a minimum. And if the conditions are such that, because of the nature of the rock and the fissures, and the vibrations will be potentially transmitted further than 250 feet, I'd like to see that our residents that might be 300 feet or 350, I don't know what the right number is, are also have the same protections that people within 250 feet have.
And the town, the Baker School butts this property, so.
Absolutely.
We have a vested
Yep.
interest
Yep.
just as much as
Yep.
the property owners.
From 1930, the Baker School.
Okay, so we're off a little bit from the subject of our present agenda item. I'm going to move that we approve and execute a contract amendment in the amount of $4,100 with Beta Group in connection with engineering peer review services for Chestnut Hill Realty's application for a comprehensive permit. Said funds are going to be provided by the applicant. All those in favor of that contract amendment, say aye. Selectman Daley?
Aye.
Selectman DeWitt?
Aye.
Selectman Waschinsky?
Aye.
Selectman Franco?
Aye.
And chair votes aye. We have another peer review matter, and I see that Ms. Steinfeld is still with us for that. So this is the question of approving and executing a contract with Isotrope LLC for peer review in connection with a wireless telecommunication rooftop proposal by Verizon at 1569 Beacon Street. Ms. Steinfeld.
Thank you. Again, consistent with the peer review process, this contract will be paid for by the applicant, Verizon. It relates to 1569 Beacon Street. The peer review will focus on coverage gap analysis and compliance with FCC standards for maximum permissible human exposure. This is a standard procedure in reviewing wireless facilities.
Is this a particularly large facility that they're proposing here?
No, I don't think it's particularly large. It's
No.
just on a rooftop in a residential area.
Just the
and-
standard one, right?
Right. I believe it's standard for Brookline. It's my first one.
All right. Other questions?
Why don't we have fiber optic? Forget it.
Verizon, yeah.
Well,
I mean,
Verizon.
Yeah, it's Verizon, I get it. Yeah, yeah. This different branch. of
I know,
Verizon,
I know,
but
I
get it.
know.
I get why you thought that.
Okay.
I move that we approve and execute a contract with Isotrope LLC for peer review in connection with a wireless telecommunications rooftop proposal by Verizon for 1569 Beacon Street. Said contract to be funded by Verizon. All in favor, say aye. Selectman Daley?
Aye.
Selectman DeWitt?
Aye.
Selectman Waschinsky?
Aye.
Selectman Franco?
Aye.
Chair votes aye.
Thank you for both.
Thank you. Miscellaneous agenda item E is the question of authorizing the chairman to execute the requests for release of funds and certifications for fiscal year 2015 and for CDBG funded activities. Mr. Viola.
Good evening, Joe Viola, Assistant Director for Community Planning, and requesting that the board authorize Chairman Goldstein to execute this request for release of funding. As you may remember, we were here a few weeks back seeking your approval to submit an environmental review record to HUD. Essentially, this is step 2 to that process, and the request for release of funds certifies to HUD that we've gone through the applicable environmental review process and that all 3 of these projects are in compliance with any regulations pertaining to environmental review. After HUD receives this documentation, they have their own 15-day public comment period, and pending no holdup there, our grantees will actually be able to begin expending money in another few weeks. So that's all I have.
Good. Questions from board members? Confused about the pedestrian bridge, $300,000. I thought that Children's Hospital was paying for that.
That's right. And we think it's, all of our HUD funding needs to be cleared, and prior to having a discussion about reprogramming that funding, we just think it's a prudent way to address the, just getting the money cleared and having the conversation for reprogramming at a later date.
So the CDBG number appropriation is basically a placeholder?
Yes, that's fair to say.
Probably our discussion would be about putting it back into affordable housing at some later point.
Right.
Which is what we were interested in doing.
Right. But before you do that, it has to be cleared, and that's essentially what this will do.
Good. That resolves my confusion.
Okay.
Anything else? All right. I move that we authorize the chair to execute requests for release of funds and certifications for fiscal year 2015 CDBG G, funded activities. All in favor, say aye. Selectman Daley?
Aye.
Selectman DeWitt?
Aye.
Selectman Waschinsky?
Aye.
Selectman Franco?
Aye.
And the chair votes aye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Miscellaneous agenda item F is the question of approving and executing a final WRRRP reimbursement request in the amount of $3,600.72 to the Mass Department of Transportation Highway Division in connection with contract number PW1208, repair of bituminous concrete patches. Mr. Ditto.
Yes, this is my third and final request for this reimbursement. This actually represents the retainage we held on the contract, or releasing it back to him, so that's why it's such a small number. It's $3,600.72. Our total grant was finalized at $144,000 and change.
Okay, any questions? Pretty straightforward. I move that we approve and execute a final WRP reimbursement request in the amount of $3,600.72 to the Mass Department of Transportation and Highway Division in connection with the repair of bituminous concrete patches. All in favor, say aye. Selectman Daley?
Aye.
Selectman DeWitt?
Aye.
Selectman Waschinsky?
Aye.
Selectman Franco?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. And we have a number of temporary alcoholic beverage licenses, and I'll do them all in omnibus fashion. The following temporary licenses are proposed and moved. Wine and malt beverage license to Brookline Interactive Group in connection with an open house to be held on October 16, 2014, from 5 p.m. to 8 p.m. at 46 Tappan Street. A wine and malt beverage license to the Pierce School PTO in connection with Harvest Fest to be held on October 17th from 7 p.m. to 11 p.m. at 50 School Street. A temporary wine and malt beverage license to the Brookline High School Union Class of 1969 in connection with a reunion to be held on October 18th from 6 p.m. to 11 p.m. at 115 Greenhouse Street Atrium, the MLK Room. A temporary wine and malt beverage license to the Puppet Showplace Theater in connection with Puppet Showplace Slam to be held October 18th from 8 p.m. to 11 p.m. at 32 Station Street. A temporary liquor license to Pine Manor College in connection with the following events to be held at 400 Heath Street. A bar mitzvah on November 8th from 7 p.m. to 11 p.m. That's wine and malt only. All kinds beverage licenses at Pine Manor for a reception on October 29th, 6 p.m. to 8 p.m., a bar mitzvah on November 1st, 6 p.m. to 11 p.m., and a bar mitzvah on November 15th from 6 p.m. to 11 p.m. And finally, all alcoholic beverage temporary licenses on town property for the Lars Anderson Auto Museum in connection with the following events at 15 Newton Street, a wedding reception on October 24th, 4 p.m. to 11 p.m., and a birthday party on October 26th, 5:30 p.m. to 11 p.m. All in favor, say aye. Selectman Daley?
Aye.
Selectman DeWitt?
Aye.
Selectman Waschinsky?
Aye.
Selectman Franco?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Thank you. We'll move on to our regular calendar, and the first item for consideration is Agenda Item 5, and it's the question of making a offer of employment to Alexander Aruda to fill a position in the firefighting force due to a resignation. Chief Ford.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Recently, you have given me approval to fill 4 vacancies, and we are right in the middle of that process. In fact, we're about wrapping it up. I believe I hope to be on the agenda next week to speak on that. In the meantime, since we started that process, we did have an unexpected vacancy, and so I'm here before you tonight to ask that you allow me to move forward with that process. This is a little unusual because of the numbers that we just interviewed. Normally, I would come before you and get authorization to move forward, and we would then send out cards, have applications, background checks, and so forth. Well, because we're right in the middle of that, on the civil service guidelines, we've already done all that process with a number of individuals. So we don't, that whole month of process has already taken place. Alexander was in the beginning process. He was not one of the top 4 selected. And so I came to you with those 4 names. Now we have the vacancy, so I would like the authorization to move forward with the hiring process and actually, because that's already been done, that initial part, get a conditional offer of employment to Alexander so he can move forward with the next process, which is the medical, the psychological, and then the physical abilities test.
Okay, I understand. Any questions from board members? Good.
So he was the fifth one?
Correct.
Okay, I got it.
I don't see any reason to not move this unless I hear from one of you. All right.
Go ahead.
So I move that we authorize a conditional offer of employment to Alexander Arruda to fill a vacancy in the position of firefighter due to a resignation. All in favor, say aye. Selectman Daley?
Aye.
Selectman DeWitt?
Aye.
Selectman Waschinsky?
Aye.
Selectman Franco?
Aye.
Chair votes aye.
Thank you.
Chief.
Have a good day.
We have some interviews for boards and commissions. The first one is an applicant for our Arts Commission, Lauren Wisbeski. Is Lauren here? Good evening. Please come right to the podium. Introduce yourself, please, and tell us a little bit about yourself and why you're interested in this appointment.
Sure. My name's Lauren Wisbeski. I recently graduated from Boston University, and I'm living in Brookline near Coolidge Corner. I'm interested in joining the commission because I really have a deep appreciation for art, and I have experience with grants and special event planning, so I feel like I could contribute to the commission even though I don't have a powerful history in art. I think that my appreciation for it will suffice, and then my skills in other areas would be really helpful.
Good. Well, I see you've got an interest in classical piano, and
I used to play, yeah.
yeah, so that's hard.
Yeah.
Questions for Ms.
Well, I just was going to
Wisbeski.
say that I think our Arts Commission has a pretty broad mission, which could include music, visual arts, all kinds of things. So an interest in music is definitely a worthy qualification.
In fact, I think over time, I think our Arts Commission should be doing more in
Be more
dance and
expansive.
Yeah, right.
music and, other forms of art other than the visual arts. So, Selectman Franco?
You cite in your application fundraising expertise. I was curious to know if you had any particular ideas for the Arts Commission for fundraising, or if you'd gotten that far in your thoughts.
I have a lot of experience with canvassing, so a lot of grassroots efforts. I think I'd be able to bring those ideas to the table. And currently I'm working in a position at a nonprofit in downtown Boston where we're working on corporate fundraising, so I'm broadening my experience with different types of fundraising, and I feel like I could utilize both of those in this position.
Great. Any other questions? Selectman Daley?
Yeah, I was just going to say, usually it's the Arts Commission is a big commission, and usually we have openings, but right now, we actually have more candidates than we have openings.
Really?
So, but, you know, you look like a good candidate, but I wanted to say, if you happen to be one of the ones that doesn't make it, keep in touch, because
Okay.
I'm sure there will be openings soon, if not right now, because that, you know, it's such a big group, there tends to be a little bit of turnover. So.
Okay, sounds
That's right.
good.
We're not going to make that decision tonight, and we'll let you know when we do, but it will be soon, though.
Okay,
And
that sounds great. Thank you for your time.
And I would say we do love to have volunteers, so there are other places that you might volunteer, even if it turns out there's not an Arts Commission slot open.
Okay,
Stick with it.
thank you.
Thank you. Another candidate for appointment to the Arts Commission is Amy Emmert. Is Amy here?
My name's Amy Emmert,
Hi,
and I
Amy.
am my day job is, I'm a vice president at Dana-Farber Cancer Institute. I'm a resident of Brookline, a recent returned resident of Brookline. I was away for a while up on the North Shore. And I started out as I graduated from Syracuse years and years ago as a sculpture BFA candidate, and ended up doing a lot of different things, but ended up heading into science and science administration. So I have some experience, a lot of experience with grant preparation and writing and reaching out and doing, operating events and that sort of thing. Over the years, I've done a lot of in my personal time, spent time working for different volunteer groups to support the arts, just to try to keep my own, passion there. And, most recently I worked as the volunteer coordinator for the North Shore Youth Symphony Orchestras, which was a lot of fun. It's a big group, and coordinating events and getting people, together to work on different projects. And that was fun because it allowed me to take some of my computer experience and pull together a scheduling process to get a lot more people involved. I also think, as you mentioned in the conversation with the previous candidate, think that the commission has some great people, but I think would be great to expand the sort of realm of arts that are supported to include some of the performing arts. I think there's a huge opportunity in Brookline to do that. The high school is so strong with young people coming out of there from the performing arts, and yet there isn't a lot of venues in Brookline for them to play or perform. And I think I probably tend to focus on that as a member of the commission, and also those areas tend to provide better opportunities for fundraising as well.
Great. Questions? Anyone? You must be an extremely busy person, given that you're Vice President at Dana-Farber, and your interests seem far beyond just the arts. Are you sure you have time for this?
I do. I've attended 2 meetings already, and I've gone to 2 of the events. I really enjoy the people. It's a great opportunity for me to interact with people that are doing other things besides what I do. Mm-hmm. And it's very local, and it's easy to get around. So I haven't really found that there will be a problem. I mean, every once in a while we have real emergencies, and we have to, we just can't do other things. We have to, hang out at work and finish up with that. But for the most part, I just don't think that would get in the way at all. I've been able to do this with other groups, and it hasn't been a problem.
Great. Thank you. Anything else, Board
Well,
members?
we certainly appreciate your interest.
Well, thank you for allowing me to apply. But I will continue to attend the meetings regardless and see if I can help as a volunteer.
Okay.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, we have an applicant for 2 different commissions. Larry Oney is applying for Advisory Council on Public Health and the Parks and Rec Commission. Mr. Oney.
All right.
Tell us about yourself, and we know that you've got history with boards and commissions already, but why don't you recount that for us and why you're interested in these 2 commissions?
Yes, I've lived in Brookline since 1974, and my wife and I have thoroughly enjoyed having the wonderful parks and recreation in Brookline. And I am a tennis player and deeply concerned about life at Amory Park and the Lawrence School. And if there's an opening, I would appreciate the opportunity to serve on that commission. And frankly, I've been really impressed with the professionalism of the staff at Parks and Recreation and being responsive to issues that have been raised, but interested in volunteering for that commission. In terms of the Advisory Committee on Public Health, I've had a long professional interest in the issue of looking at certain issues that are not seen as public health issues, but are seen as whether crime issues or bad parenting, whatever. And one of the things that, based upon my experience serving on the Brookline Human Relations Commission, and also running dialogue groups and being very active privately on race issues in Brookline, that I've come to the conclusion that I think we have, I would like to see the issue of systemic race issues seen as a public health issue. And so, and I actually have had conversation with staff about that, and they agreed with me. So and the other thing is that I have worked with drug addicts, interested in have expertise in process addiction, bullying, have a MSW from University of Michigan. So I would appreciate having the opportunity to be considered for the Advisory Committee on Public Health.
Thanks. Larry, you didn't submit a resume with your application, so I'm just curious whether you're, I know you've got a varied professional history, but any of your professional history directly relevant to either of these commissions?
Sure.
Tell me about that, please.
Several years ago, not in Brookline, but in Washington, D.C., I was instrumental in getting lead paint poisoning legislation passed in the District of Columbia. And at that particular time, what happened is that parents, single parents who were living in public housing projects were having these serious issues, health issues for their children, okay? And the response of the government generally was that you're just a lousy parent, you're not watching your child properly, and you know, it's your individual problem. Okay. So then we went to the issue, then they said, well, it's the problem is the maintenance of the house and the public housing authority, okay? And so that it got shifted to that area. Then finally, we discovered that the real problem was that tests were going to the public health lab and they were not being treated properly, and they were not accurate measurements. So, you know, my experience in terms of an issue that was not seen as a public health issue initially, we turned that around and we formed a coalition, and Washington, D.C. was one of the first cities to have this lead paint poisoning legislation. Of course, we had to fight the paint companies. It was quite an experience. So, you know, my experience is that often issues that are seen as kind of individualistic or kind of blaming the victim are often public health issues. And it's the same thing with, look, gun control is, if we looked at that as a public health issue, that might change the conversation.
Okay. Thank you. Other questions for Mr. Oney? Okay. Well, thank you. No, Selectman Daley?
I will just tell you that you have picked two groups that there are a couple of incumbents that wish to be reappointed and no obvious openings. But, so I just give you that fair warning.
Okay, appreciate that. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Oney. Candidate for appointment to the Tree Planting Committee, Peggy, and trustees of Walnut Hill Cemetery, Peggy McGuire. Ms. McGuire. Thank you. Great. Will you introduce yourself, tell us about yourself and why you're interested?
First timer here, so I had to write a few notes. Good evening, Selectmen, Selectwoman, Town Administrator, Nancy, and Ben. Good to see you guys again. By way of a brief introduction, and I don't know how much time I have, but I've got two committees, so I'm going to try to make it in about 3 minutes if I can. My name is Peggy McGuire, and it's spelled M-A-G-U-I-R-E, not as the agenda states. There's no MC. And I live in South Brookline on Shaw Road, and I feel very fortunate to finally find a town that I've arrived in and think I want to live here the rest of my life. So in August of 2011, just before, well, that fateful September, I moved to Brookline, and I've never been any happier living here. So I have been fortunate to have the experience of living in many cities and out in the country. So I was born in Lowell, grew up in suburban Chelmsford, went to school there, the high school there. I lived in the cities of Nashua, Boston, and Brockton. And I also lived for 7 years in the country in Hollis, New Hampshire. So what I'm hoping is to bring that diversity of that experience to the town of Brookline on the tree committee. And I actually, when I lived in New Hampshire, that's for over 2 decades I lived there, and I absolutely grew to love the outdoors. I spent many winters skiing in Bretton Woods, and I grew to appreciate the natural environment and was a very avid weekend hiker on Mount Monadnock. So after several decades of work experience, I now have time on my hands because I'm retiring. So I would like to give back to the community and bring my management skills, my fiduciary skills, my committee experience to the town of Brookline by volunteering my time and bringing those skill sets to either one of these committees that you feel my skills would be a good match for.
Great, thank you. Grew up on Shaw Road myself, one of the
Oh.
best tree-lined streets in our town, I think,
What
actually.
number there?
94.
A little further down, 43.
That's
So
right.
you know the neighborhood. And you can appreciate the trees that are
I
there.
can.
Absolutely
I can.
beautiful.
Well, our town administrator's been trying to track down for us the answer to a question we
No,
have.
we've
by-
got it. Go
Late
ahead.
breaking, yeah, we have only a three-member committee on the tree planting committee. It is set by a special statute back in the 1800s, believe it or not. But we do have a bylaw that allows the Board of Selectmen to make non-voting alternate members or associate members, I guess. And we've been confirmed that we can do that in this case.
Okay. So are you still interested if it would be a non-voting, but you could participate in their activities?
It would give me that opportunity to at some point be, you know, it would be the first committee I'd be involved in with all this free time on my hands, and then take it forward at some point after gaining that experience. So, yes.
Okay. And you're also interested in Walnut Hills, is it?
Yes.
Cemetery.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what our
What's-
vacancies are in
Yeah, I'm
Walnut
not
Hill
sure about
Cemetery.
that.
I was just about to look it up
What drew you
and see
to
if
Walnut
if
Hills?
there's a-
Why the interest?
Well, as Mr.
Goldstein.
Yes, knows, I live in the neighborhood, so I'm very familiar with the facility and the property. I believe that the staff there do an absolutely tremendous job in what they're doing. I personally witnessed that. But it's one of the most underutilized parks in the town. And here's an opportunity perhaps for others to, from a, you know, for other people to look at it as a park. And because I know we spend a lot of resources maintaining it. There's a lot of pride in maintaining it. And it might be an opportunity for people to think of that as another, you know, another place to go on a weekend or during the week, and to be able to fully utilize it as such.
Great.
Yeah. They do have a lot of events at Forest Hills in Boston that I
That is
wondered if we
correct.
could
Right.
could
And
do
also-
some more.
Well, as it turns out, there
Mount
are
Auburn.
vacancies we just discovered. so-
Oh, okay.
And also at Mount Auburn over there in Cambridge, if anyone's familiar with that.
Right.
Other questions? Well, thank you very much for your
Thank
interest in both of these, and we'll be getting back to you shortly once we make a decision. I think we have a couple more interviews.
Thank you very much. Thanks for your
you.
time.
Next, we have some interviews, and I'm very pleased to be at this point where we're doing interviews for the new Diversity, Inclusion, and Community Relations Commission. First is Malcolm Cawthorn. Malcolm. Well, even though you need no introduction, would you please start by introducing yourself and telling us
It's the
why you're
weather, the weather,
interested?
so I hope everybody can hear me clearly and I speak coherently. I'm Malcolm Cawthorn. I teach at Brookline High School. I teach history and African American studies. I've been teaching there since 1998. I graduated from Brookline in 1988. We moved here in 1973. And there's been a Cawthorn around, even though as children we bounced around from colleges and other stuff like that. But there's been a, you know, whether it was my mother, my father, or something, there's always been a Cawthorn around in Brookline since 1973. Part of my interest purely as I got older and as saw my kids go through was an opportunity to give back to the town that's been very good to me and my family. And I think this is another opportunity for me to do that and to work to make Brookline better, even though it is already great. We always have room to improve.
Very good. Questions for Malcolm?
Well, I just have to say that Malcolm was one of the patient members of our Selectmen's Diversity Committee and we had a lot of meetings to get through our work on the bylaw, and we are still going to get together a few more times to work on fair housing, but I'm glad to see you're interested in sticking with the topic here.
Thank you.
The questions. Malcolm, you'll forgive us if we don't pepper you with too many questions. You're a known entity, as are the other two candidates for this appointment that we'll speak to in a moment. We're glad that you formalized your request, and we're glad to see you up here.
Yeah, the way I'm feeling, brevity is appreciated.
Let me just ask you, though, do you have any specific projects? Or, I mean, since you're in the education business, I think that there's a lot of potential education projects that this commission might take on.
I would agree. I mean, the only specific project that I'm working on, which I think does sort of, it wouldn't make its way to this commission, but it is sort of the ideal of what the commission is looking for. Is I mentor 12 students in what's called Today's Students, Tomorrow's Teachers. And the goal is to identify children of color in 8th grade, mentor them through high school. Our first graduating class is going to be this spring in 2015. And if they follow through the mentor and everything else and all the other programs, and they go to an affiliated college, they can get a half scholarship, which I guess by definition is a loan until they come back. The goal for them to come back and teach at Brookline or one of the other neighboring districts. We're really fingers crossed on Brookline. But yeah, so it's really to identify teachers of color and hopefully bring them back to our district. Not necessarily the same route I did, but in sort of the same ideal of children of color who understand Brookline can come back and be effective teachers within the district. And so that's a project I'm highly dedicated to, but it's also something I think we can build on, and the commission can ask about more projects similar to something like that.
Good. Anything else from Malcolm? Thank you again.
Go home and get well.
Thank you. I'm going to try.
Ernest, you're next. Another known entity.
Maybe too well-known. Ernie Fry, town meeting member, former member of the commission to which I hope to be a future member of. It seems that when I joined the commission, everybody else left. So I'm not sure if I'm the cause or whatever, but I certainly would like to see the commission be revitalized and explore. I'm mostly concerned with procedure and making sure that we have a way for the people who are who feel they've been disadvantaged by various town employees or town citizens to be able to, that they have a way to get have their problems addressed. And that's not clear to me that there is a process, and I'm hoping to work on that sort of thing with the commission. And I do hope that we can get this commission enrolled and active and as quickly as possible.
Good. Questions for Mr. Fry? Selectman Daley.
Yeah, other than that, do you have any sort of affirmative, I don't know what the right word is. I'm looking for, interested in hoping that this commission will take on some educational projects, some sort of addressing discrimination issues before they arise, reaching out and into our schools maybe or something and playing that educational role. Is that something that you're interested in?
I would, again, I'm working on process, and if, I don't know that I could specifically put my finger on a particular outreach process that the commission could do in that respect, other than, a lot has been said about the amount of minority representation there is among the leaders of the town, and I guess the teachers, it's not quite as disadvantage, not quite as much of a problem there. But,
for instance, the people running the Hidden Brookline program used to be affiliated with or work with the commission, and that is a program that educates people about the Underground Railroad and some sites here in Brookline that were connected to that.
One of the things that I am interested in is history I'm kind of a genealogical person looking into that sort of thing, and any of the history. I'm a member of the Historical Commission, Brookline Historical Commission, and I'm interested in cultivating that awareness of what is happening in Brookline, or what has happened in Brookline, just as an awareness sort of thing.
Yes, Selectman DeWitt.
I just want to follow up on your comments about process, because it will be a sort of an interesting circumstance when the commission is appointed, being sort of old and new at the same time. And it seems to me that one of the challenges will be to define activities that are, let's say, one, appropriate and desirable, but also having a way of setting some sort of goals that the commission can work on. Is that something that you feel strongly about?
I am very concerned about the condition of the commission currently, in that basically we have to figure out what we are about and what we're supposed to be doing. And I'm hoping that I can form, a person that can, contribute to that discussion, and hopefully we'll be able to define ourselves a bit better than what we have. I'm impressed by the remaining members of the commission, former commission, even though we could not have any meetings, but there seemed to me to be a lot of energy around the people that were remaining, and a lot of capabilities. There were a lot of ideas that were tossed out that many would like to have done, and I'm hoping that we can capitalize on that and try to form ourselves and define ourselves.
Good, thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Ernie.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it. Enid Starr.
No,
Not Enid Shapiro. Another famous Enid.
Oh, right.
Sorry, Enid.
Thank you for the opportunity. Many of you know me. I certainly know who you are. And I'm, in addition to being the oldest member of the former commission, I'm a resident of Brookline. I grew up in Brookline, went to Brookline High School, and I'm a clinical social worker. Now, I think I'm retired, but I'm busy enough so that I wonder sometimes. I'm very concerned as a social worker about process, and I really feel as though I've committed myself to the process of developing a commission that addresses some of the major issues that have been raised around what the commission is about. I certainly have the history behind me. I grew up in Brookline, but I moved away while I was raising my family and came back here 17 years ago and joined the commission at that time. So I do have some perspective. I'm particularly interested in education and the opportunity to work perhaps on some activities that will include high schoolers. It's thrilling to me to see somebody who is part of the high school that I went to and that I really support wholly, come forward and participate. And I hope you will give me the opportunity to continue. So I'd be glad to answer any questions. I do have some history behind me, and perhaps I can answer them.
Questions for Ms. Shapiro?
Well, Enid, I just want to reassure you that while you may be the oldest of the ones that are reapplying, but there wasn't
I'm sorry.
There was an older member on the former commission.
Dear. Well, I don't want to give up my position.
Yeah.
I mean, I like that position. I also think there's a place on the commission for someone who represents the seniors in the community.
Right.
And I certainly do that.
Yes.
I'm also a member of the State Advisory Board on Elder Affairs. I don't know what that's going to be like after the election, but we'll see.
Well, I just wanted you to tell the others. I know Enid went to South Africa earlier this year on a mission to work on some social work issues there.
Well, I wasn't alone. I was with 3 other social workers, and we went to Cape Town to work it was early March, to work in one of the townships, working on helping the staff, the indigenous staff, address some of the problems of communication and whatever. And some of my colleagues are going back. Unfortunately, I'm not able to, but we are Skyping, and I'm into the new technology, and it is very exciting, I can tell you.
Very good. Great.
Thank you. Other questions?
Well, I just appreciate that you're willing to come back and continue after the number of years you have devoted to this. So I appreciate your willingness.
Well, I love living in the town of Brookline. I think this has been a community that has been open and supportive, and there's nothing I wouldn't do to help the town just achieve the highest. I'm looking forward to the opportunity to represent Brookline in many areas.
That's the best kind of citizen.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you very much for coming out for this. We'll be making decisions soon. We've got some more interviews to conduct first, though. Thank you. Fred LeBeau, candidate for reappointment to the Naming Commission, Naming Committee. Good evening, Fred.
LeBeau, Chair of the Naming Committee. Any questions?
Start. What's your name? Why do you?
Just said it.
I figured I'd get to it fast.
Yeah.
I'll start again. Fred LeBeau, Chair of the Naming Committee.
Yep.
We have been responsible for generating a sometimes controversy, but sometimes, most of the time, a good guidelines and policies for naming. I remember when Dave Turner retired, he came up to me and said, "This was your best warrant article that you ever put in." I don't agree with it, but I think there's better ones, but I think it served the purpose. I think one only has to go into Cambridge and go to any intersection and see 3 or 4 names on every corner, because they're just out of room, which to me is ridiculous. It just defeats the whole purpose. We are meeting next week on looking at some issues. I'll bring up quickly. How long should a resident live in Brookline before he could have some kind of an award? If you remember, a few years ago, we had a fireman who fell out of a door on a fire truck. I think any employee of the town who gets critically injured on the job should get some kind of a plaque. I mean, again, this is stuff that we're going to bring up. Can't tell you whether the other committee members are going to go for it. We are, right now, by just general policy, but it's not written in our guidelines, having the naming committee present to town meeting all the warrant articles concerning any type of recommendation that we make. And then we have this issue with, that was brought up the last time, but it's actually in our guidelines, which after 10 years, we may recommend, and I make that point, we may recommend that it be removed. And next town meeting, I believe there'll be a number of things that we will recommend to town meeting to be removed. One of the problems is, of course, we have limited real estate. We're not as big as Cambridge or Boston. We only have so many squares, so many intersections, so many parks, so many schools, and so forth. So that's what the naming committee does. Just while you're thinking about this, Bill McGurty from the Veterans Affairs, every year he comes up to me and says, "Oh, I got a vet that I want to bring forward." The way our guidelines work is whatever he brings forward, we sort of rubber stamp, because we're not in a position to determine the vet background. So far, in all the years we've been operating, not one time. And every time I go up to him, he says, "Well, it really isn't right." And before the naming committee, we used to get 2 or 3 people, applicants a year, who were a veteran, and we actually don't have much to do with it. It's the Veterans Affairs people. So it does do what it's supposed to do. It does do, I think, the vetting. That's where we are. I think we've done a good job.
Thank you, Fred. You said on your application you would like to look into the park bench program a little closer.
Yeah.
Tell us what you've got in mind there.
Well, right now, you know, we've put that under the park bench. We have it under our policy guidelines. It doesn't seem to ever get advertised. People don't realize, if you go in other towns, and I have a summer place in Falmouth, and I just went down to Rhode Island on a river tour, and you wouldn't believe how many park benches have people memory. And of course, they pay for the park benches, and I just don't think, we just don't advertise. We don't, a lot of people just don't know that that's available to them. Obviously, if they want to put it in a park, it's about $2,500, because it's going to be, you got to put a pad down, a concrete pad, and cement. If you do it on the sidewalk, it would be less money, because it's already a concrete base. If you go down, I don't want to say Busy Bee, but I'll say it. There's no benches. There's almost like one bench. You got to walk. There should be more benches, and somebody should pay for them, and it's just not advertised. So that's one of the things that we want to try to see if we can stimulate.
Great, thank you. Questions for Fred? Nope. Well, Mr. LeBeau, we thank you for your continued...
Just mention that the naming committee has brought order to a function that was rather disorderly. So, prior to the naming committee, these naming requests would go right to town meeting, and there was no consistency, and it was good that we now have a policy and a group of folks who diligently review them and apply policies. And
I'm not going to say everybody's happy with our policy, okay? And there's times that I'm not happy with having to vote the way I vote. But you know, that's the job. You follow your policy. The nice thing about the way we've written the policy, you know, it is or it isn't. It's not. We tried to write it in such a way that we don't have political influence. Obviously, that doesn't always happen, but that's the way it's written. So, I think we do actually a pretty good job for the town. Not to brag, but I think I will.
A minor footnote, and that is, I recall that the DPW worried that they were running out of space for benches. So before you go too quickly forward promoting them, check in first.
Yeah, we have a lot of sidewalks. That's not under their authority.
Yes, it is, actually.
is?
It's public
Okay.
way. So I'm suggesting a friendly chat with
Oh, no, I'm sorry.
DPW.
Park and Recs handle the benches
I'm talking
and
about
parks.
DPW.
Yeah,
Overall, both Parks and Rec, but
Okay.
Parks and DPW.
they always are consulted. Do you want to go into the next subject?
No, not yet.
Good.
Thank you, Fred, for everything you do. We'll talk to you in a few minutes about noise control. Next, we have a presentation for about the Brookline Interactive Group, BIG, and I know Selectman Waschinsky's been working closely with this group. Neil, do you want to introduce the matter?
I'm glad to introduce Karen Katz, who's now the chairman of the board of BIG, and they're now having a new executive director coming on, Kathy Bisbee.
Great.
Coming from the West Coast. So hopefully we'll get some new ideas. So why don't you let us know what's going on?
Yeah, it's also what's big
It's all
and big.
going on in California. So I'm Karen Katz, and thank you for having us here. We have had a lot of exciting things happen at Brookline Interactive Group over the past year that run the gamut from putting in a lot more financial controls, hiring a specific bookkeeper, figuring out where all of our money is and putting it into an account with Fidelity where it can earn more interest. We have a $400,000 reserve. We've also rebranded, as you guys know, and have gone on a mission to find a new executive director. And a couple of my other board members are here tonight, Peter Miller and Laura Nooney, who have been actively involved in the search for the new executive director, as well as taking us to the next level with our K through 8 mission. We're very nicely embedded in the high school and now want to do more in the community. So bringing Kathy on board with a tremendous amount of skill sets, and I think you guys have her resume, is super exciting. She'll be with us full-time December 1st and has lots of great new fresh ideas and lots of experience working with access centers. So we're super excited, and she's been here all day meeting with staff, meeting with town officials, meeting with a lot of our members and so forth. So it's been a great day for her, and we're just looking forward to the next step. And I also want to really thank Neil for ponying up and being our liaison. It's been super helpful. We've learned a lot about how to kind of work with the town more effectively, and so thank you, Neil. So I'm going to hand it over to Kathy so she can say a few words.
Thank you, Karen.
Hello, thank you so much for the warm welcome by the members of the community today, and by Neil and Betsy and Mel, who all came, and I hope to get some time with all of you as well. I won't be here until December 1st, but I'm very much looking forward to getting to know this community. I decided I would come here because I heard about the warm winters you've been having. So I am actually quite familiar with the New England winters. I'm originally from Western Maine. I grew up in a small town near Farmington, Maine, and it's been 22 years since I've gone out to California, and now I'm back, and it's couldn't be a nicer fall for me to return. And what a wonderful community you have here. I got to meet quite a few people today at a very lovely reception planned by the staff and the board, and got to really sit down with the staff today and hear about all the wonderful programs that BIG is doing in the community with your support and with the community's collaboration and partnership. So I'm very excited. I come from a state that does not have the kind of support that you enjoy here in Massachusetts, and I'm so excited to be able to do more and build upon what's been built here at BIG. So I'm excited to work with you, and I look forward to hearing any questions or thoughts that you have. Thank you.
Thanks. Questions or comments from board members?
So what do you think of the new facility?
Wow. Wow. It's, you know, it's a little, I have to say, we lost our operating funds in California. And so we have been sort of living under third world conditions in community media, and so it's a little like coming to the first world. It's a beautiful facility. You really built an amazing, amazing center. And the collaboration with the education programs are just incredible. We're also, I run 2 media centers, and one of them is at a high school. And, I think they could actually learn a few things from BIG, as well as bringing some of our ideas here as well.
Would you say that your new initiatives would more likely be in the field of education or in programming or what?
It's a little hard for me to say any of that at the moment. I have been to BIG twice for an interview each time, and then spent today. That's really the only amount of time I've had to get my head wrapped around what's going on and all the programs. But from what I've seen today, there's definitely some great opportunities in the educational space. I think this is a community that really supports education and both vocational and 21st century job skill expansion in the schools, and I look forward to building upon that. Some of the innovation that we've had to do in California was out of losing funding by building collaborations and partnerships with other folks in the community. A lot of that's going on here already, so I have to really look at the entire landscape at BIG and see where are the areas where we can really grow. We certainly have I think, made some great strides in the organizational area, it sounds like, in the last year, and I look forward on building upon some of those areas as well.
Good, thank you. Anything further, board members?
Actually, I don't think you can answer this probably, but Karen probably could. Just, if you want to go into a little detail about your activities on Thursday, I announced earlier that there was going to be an open house, and I don't know all the details. So if there's something you'd like to say, now's your opportunity.
Okay. We have been having Thursday night lives at Brookline Interactive Group, and it's an opportunity for people to come in, record some things, see some things, and this one is sort of our yearly open house. We'll have, I know that we're going to have a lot of food.
Okay.
That's a draw. And I will be there in the evening just to do some welcoming along with some of my board members. But every year we have a big open house where we just showcase all the projects that we're working on and try and get as many community members to come in and see us. I mean, we're up in the high school, we're on the top floor, and one of my initiatives besides some K-8 stuff is just figuring out how we can be more in a street level type of situation. I always want to put that out there because our goal is to be more present in an immediate, accessible way. But that as it may, the open house is an opportunity for everyone in the community to come and see what's going on.
Great. And will you be able to stay long enough to participate, or do you have to go back to California?
I won't be there this week, but I will, as of December, I will be on board.
Okay, probably the next one then.
The next one, absolutely,
Right. Okay.
absolutely.
Kathy, do you think you're going to live in town?
I'm looking for a place to live and would welcome any suggestions.
You can sleep on my
Certainly.
couch for a couple of weeks.
It's got nice trees. And
Shaw Road, that'd be good, yeah.
I'm certainly looking, there's a number of lovely places that I've been looking at in the area. I really probably will start looking in the middle of December. I have some close friends here locally that I'm going to be staying with, so until probably January 1st. So.
Good.
Well, welcome to Brookline.
Thank you.
I hope the readjustment back to the East Coast is an easy one, and we look forward to seeing you in December.
Thank you so much.
Just in time for winter.
Right. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you both. Good night, Karen. And that brings us to agenda item 8, which is the first discussion of warrant articles for this evening. First one is warrant article number 9, and Fred, you're back up.
So the advisory committee is referring it because they
It's deja vu all over again here.
Fred Lebo, petitioner on the noise bylaw. So, you all remember that I submitted last time, 6 months ago, a warrant article which nobody supported, which I was surprised. But that didn't obviously stop me from going forward again, because I said...
We noticed.
Have you noticed that? Yeah. I don't take rejection easily, so... In any case, what I was looking at was, first of all, and I'll go through step by step, it turns out that people these are comments over the years that people have either called me up or someone from the town or something. I just made notes, and then there hasn't been, thankfully, there hasn't been too many issues. So the first issue was the most important one was emergency generators. People think that when they put in an emergency generator at their house, or a generator at their house, that in fact it's an emergency generator and they're exempt from the noise bylaw. Actually, that's not true. An emergency generator is really defined in the state building code. It's basically defined as life safety. For example, if it was running a sprinkler system, elevators, medical equipment, that's an emergency generator. Other stuff like trying to keep a refrigerator cool if the power goes out, or watching television, or having a lack of air conditioning due to loss of power, that's not an emergency generator. That's a convenience generator or a standby generator. So a lot of people have been putting in generators. There's been 4 in my block. And some people didn't think that they had to make sure that they had to take acoustic treatment around their unit. These units, understand, have to be 5 feet away from the house if it's wooden. And if it's brick, it has to be 3 feet. And usually these generators are usually very close to the property line. So they can become quite annoying to an abutter. So that was put in, and there was nothing wrong with that. And I think there's a general consensus that that's probably to make it clearer. And the advisory committee put in some verbiage, but they were recommending that it goes to town council. In fact, they're recommending that this goes for a committee. I feel like this is sort of like a tar baby. I just can't seem to get out of this thing. The next thing was meters. Standard recognized industry meters. There's basically 2, which is the European, the international meter, and the ANSI meter, which is the American meter. There's no reason that they give the same information. Actually, when you actually look at the way sound is processed on a IEC meter, and I have the information here. I don't want to get too technical, but it's actually a better meter. But it does give you the same information. There's no reason not to use any industry-wide meters that's accepted. OSHA, I got it off their webpage. They have, between calibrators and meters, they have like 11 meters. They're all either IEC or ANSI. There was no reason to restrict meters. In fact, there's another standard. It's called the military standard. I'm sure it gives the same information. It's probably got an explosion-proof case. But that's probably what it has. But they all give the same information. I use an IEC, but years ago I used an ANSI. But there's no reason to restrict either the town or the citizens hiring somebody not to have that meter. The third one, there seemed to be some confusion, which was brought up on a subcommittee meeting. And I said, the town, most of the background levels that are used in the town is usually for fixed equipment. They're looking at air conditioning, HVAC, refrigeration units, window units. They're looking for, that's where they, so normally, so they would go, usually it's the building department. Somebody said, I guess once in a while, maybe the police department get into it. They go up to a place, they turn off the unit, they measure the background, and they turn it on and see if there's a 10 dB difference. Obviously, it's already in the bylaw, and it says, if you read it, it says that this is the, you don't have to use it. It's assumed to be 10 dB difference, but and if somebody takes issue with it, obviously they can take issue and have it accurately determined. We put that in to make it easy. But some people who have called me, they never saw where that issue is. It's in the fixed equipment. So all I wanted to do was put it someplace in the definitions. So what I suggested to the advisory committee said, if you said that for the purposes of background noise in the area of fixed equipment, see section such and such. And that kind of, I think that resolved it. But again, town council should be the one to really kind of look at that. The fourth one became actually problematic. It started off with the noise bylaw that we put together, and in fact, all the comments over a 2-year period was for backpacks and carry-on leaf blowers, one that you can carry or put on your back. And so, in an attempt to clarify that, that was fine, saying that this is for the definition of portable. There was another warrant article put in, which I never read because I was just looking at mine, and it's in a different section. It's not even in the same section of the bylaw, of the noise bylaw. This one says anything that, portability is defined as anything that's portable, anything that can be moved, whether you sit in it, drive in it, whatever. Well, when you do that, there is basically, or at least I haven't seen, that there are stickers on the bigger units that they use, obviously, at the schools, along with towers, Tom Brady's house, Pine Manor. These, you know, you got to sit in because you'd be there for days trying to clean up the leaves. But they don't have stickers on them, and they exceed 67 dB, which means that technically you can't use them. That was the result of that. If that was the goal, and the petitioner said that was a stated goal, I don't recall that anybody had ever been, the stakeholders, the people who are the schools and the large property, have large properties, they were never invited. And if you wanted to restrict them, I mean, I don't have any dog in the hunt, obviously it'd say any leaf blower that's not a backpack or portable is exempt from the town. I mean, it's simple to say that, then everybody knows. This is sort of, it's not really clear. Not only that, when this got written, we were supposed to exempt electric leaf blowers. Now those are included. So when you start reading that, town council said she gets a lot of calls on how to interpret what's going on because there's a difference. So the advisory committee, and I think correctly, because I said, let's withdraw that. They said, let's just have another moderators committee or a selectmen's committee. They said, well, we don't want to have a moderators committee for 2 reasons. One, that I couldn't possibly get appointed to it because the moderator doesn't appoint petitioners. And 2, town council really should be involved through the whole process, which the moderators committees don't really have access to as well as a selectmen's committee. So that's basically it. I mean, it's not, thank God it isn't huge. I think the police do a very credible job of monitoring a lot of the noise issues, and I think that they've gotten better at it. And that's another one I think that we did a great job in putting it together. Obviously, we took some things from the one thing I've learned from writing, and this isn't the first one I've been involved with. You want to try to keep some of the old stuff. You don't want to start from scratch because then everybody gets nervous. So there's some stuff that was the old stuff, and I don't know where it came from, but we left it in. So there's 4 things that I use for writing a bylaw like this. One is safety. You want to make sure that whatever you do, it's safe for people. You want to see how the, what kind of town do we want to look? Obviously, you can restrict every kind of lawn keeping equipment from the town, have everybody do everything manually, but will you end up with a better town? Will you end up with a better looking town? I mean, I know I spend a fortune on my my lawn, and if people have come to my house sometimes, you'll see it, and people stop by and just stand there. I see Jackie Scott from the president of Wheelock College. She stands there sometimes. I come out, say, "What are you doing?" She says, I just got to, that helps my head. So, and I said, if you really want to help my head, let me give you the bills that I got, and you can, and you can take care of them. So that's really what, you know, any type of bylaw like this is good. So that's what the advisory committee recommended. I go along with that. I think it should go to a committee, and these things really have to be ironed out because it has to be bulletproof. You have to make it absolutely, it's got to be enforceable. After safety, it's got to be enforceable, and that's right now is a problem. Any other questions?
On leaf blowers, I get the portable, handheld, backpack. I get the ones that you drive in, maybe exempt. It seems we haven't talked about the
No,
one.
you're not supposed to, actually, under the way it's written, you're not supposed to use them at all.
Right, I understand, but I understand that we may decide that those are exempt because it's
Yeah.
not practical for large commercial users. But what I don't know, what your vision is the very common form of leaf blower that's in between those two. It's the one that's approximately the size of a lawnmower. It's kind of it's a
push device.
A blower on wheels, and is that portable? Is that not portable?
Well,
what was your original vision?
The original vision was, it was just, because that didn't come up in any of the meetings.
Yeah.
I mean, people have now come to me and said, listen, I use a leaf blower in the winter to blow snow away. Now, that's certainly quieter than a snow blower, and they use it because there's no residue, and it's just easier for them to do. Should that be allowed? These are things that the committee may have to look at and have public hearings again and see what people want. It's not, as I said, I don't have any dog in the hunt. When we wrote this, if the other warrant article hadn't been put in, by the way, it's not part of the noise bylaw, so it's separate, so I never looked at it until actually we had the subcommittee meeting, and now I find that there's other language on another bylaw on noise, and it's just too confusing.
Yeah. Those push ones, do they tend to comply with our noise standard, or
No.
or not comply?
No.
They tend to not comply.
Because the people, the manufacturer, like Echo, which I've had communication with, they're pushing it because, the portable ones, because that's what most residential homes use. Either they buy it themselves or they have their landscaper. You wouldn't usually take a big push one because it's inconvenient unless you were doing like 5 or 6 homes in a row. I mean, my lawn is about 1,500 feet. I mean, they can do a lawn on a backpack very quickly in my house. One of the things which of course people haven't thought about, let's assume for a moment that we restrict everything other than backpacks. On a time-weighted average, you end up with more noise. The quicker the job is done, the less noise you end up with. It may be louder, but it's louder for a shorter period of time. If you remember, I was representing the abutters at Fisher Hill, and we used a time-weighted average because there were peaks that would have exceeded the standards that we set. But over time, they were under the average, and that got transmitted to the building department every 15 minutes. So we used a data logger, and that's how it was done. And the only complaint there was on the noise was that there was a vibration and somebody lost their dishes or something. It fell off the cabinet. But other than that, there wasn't any issue with the noise. So, and I think, Betsy, you and I were at Dexter Park. We designed an acoustic wall. It was complicated, it took 5 or 6 months, not a single complaint after we put up the wall. So, it took a lot of, I mean, it works.
I didn't realize you designed acoustic walls.
No, she
I
did.
didn't design it.
She was there.
I did, however, support the idea, which was effective, and we weren't sure before it was put up that it would be, but it seems to have worked, so yeah.
Well, you had a
But,
good
you know,
engineer.
that's not, that's a little off the subject
Yeah,
of
no, I
the-
understand.
Questions? Selectman Franco.
I applaud your effort, Fred, to bring some clarity to these subjects, and I'm hoping you can provide some clarity to me on something that you've proposed to change.
Okay.
You mentioned that you're looking to bring European standards, the European noise dBA standard, into this bylaw. It seems to me that one of the important things is to have a definitive answer on whether the noise violates the bylaw or not. And by having two separate standards in there, there's always...
the same. They both meters read exactly the same.
There's got to be some discrepancy between the
It's
two.
the way it's processed is the same. In fact, if you want, I didn't want to, why don't I give you a sheet, you can read it, and give it back to me, and that way, yeah, because I don't, these people look bored. And so why don't you read it, and then it will tell you what the difference is.
Yeah, they both measure dBs, right?
It's also used, by the way,
Back
it's
to
also
the-
used in
Speak into the microphone, please.
It's also used, OSHA uses, they call it, they don't put down a meter, they say any industry recognized standard. They don't put that in because every, you know, as equipment gets better, as the technology gets better, we might be having meters in the future that read 1/2 dB accuracy rather than 1. You might have a different way of displaying it. You know, now they have digital. Before it was all analog. You used to read a screen. The town has an ANSI meters that I picked out with the chief. It's highly accurate. It's down to 1 dB, but it has 0 storage. So whatever you see on the screen, you look at it, and if you turn off the noise, it turns off the meter. So it's not the meter that I recommended to the chief. I said, listen, you can't go to quote with that. He said, I'm not going to quote with anything with this. I just want to get something that we can intimidate the people to do the right thing, and that's what the meters use. They come up with a meter, and everybody gets all excited, and that's it.
Questions? Selectman DeWitt.
I actually understand, I think, perhaps why advisory committee thought it should go to a committee and whether it's selectmen or not. Perhaps I understand the logic for a selectman for several reasons, which I might not have thought of if it hadn't been for the advisory committee's vote. Because there is the other bylaw, and it seems to me we do not want to ignore how these two work together, so that makes a lot of sense to me. And the other question that is not really addressed here, although it is, it's part of the bylaw, is enforcement. My neighbors come to me with complaints having to do with, and there are several different versions of this. One is that leaf blowers are being used out of season when they're not supposed, when they're supposedly prohibited. The other bylaw, by the way, not this one. And also, they feel that they are tortured by the fact that maybe one property starts being blown, or whatever it is, at 8 a.m., and then it's sort of like the torture moves around and the same noise level continues, or maybe there are two companies working simultaneously in two different sites contributing, and you were just talking about what is an ambient level. I'm here to tell you, because I've heard some of this, two operating together is not ambient level at all, and whether or not it would meet the standard of the noise bylaw is a question I think somebody needs to talk about, because it is, in fact, pretty painful to listen to.
Well, the background level is when there's no machinery running.
Right, I understand.
Okay, and then when something is running.
Okay, but we're talking about one of these devices
Sure.
operating, and I'm suggesting there are many cases where on the same property there are two or more individuals carrying backpacks, running them together at the same time, making lots of noise. If there are two on one property and another one on a similar property not very
Next door,
far away,
sure.
it's even more noise. And I'm not clear what, if anything, can be done about that, and maybe that's an uncontrollable thing. But I will tell you, it's deafening, absolutely deafening.
Well, one of the things that I thought about, I mean, again, if you have the push type, okay, which is obviously very loud, they're in the 80 dB range.
Well, and we've actually apparently had one of those around, and it did
Right.
not meet the town's bylaw.
Right, and it wouldn't, it wasn't ever meant to, but in any case, and we don't have any real test equipment to measure that type of equipment, so we can't get the town, give a sticker, but in any case.
Yeah, that also should be addressed.
Yeah, so the issue that I thought of, that these things are used on small property because they're trying to get around the noise bylaw, is that we could restrict that not to be used on small property. Now, I would have to define what small property is. Maybe it's a 3,000 square foot lawn, maybe it's a 2,000 square foot lawn. Big lawns, obviously, you know, you don't, I mean, people at Pine Manor, I mean, nobody hears them. I mean, they're out in the wilderness there, so, I mean, there's not houses around there, but look at.
I just think what I was trying to say is a committee to look at this and try to
Sure.
examine the unintended consequences makes some
Well,
sense.
we've made terrific progress. There is no bylaw on noise that's perfect. I mean,
Sure.
but we'll do the best we can, and that's the deal. Listen, you know, we haven't got to Mars yet either, you know,
In the definition section under ambient to background noise, there's a default in the proposal that for the purpose of enforcement, background noise shall be 10 dB lower than background noise measured during the day. At town meeting, there was a rather dramatic presentation that I think influenced a lot of people in voting this down on how that just doesn't quite work.
well, I understand, this is what I mean, if you look at any textbook that describes that, both Brennick and Newman, Leo Brennick, his book, this is why it says it's assumed. If someone challenges it, then they can make the actual measurements. So it's assumed to be that. That solves a lot of problems for the town. This has been working, by the way, for, I forgot how many years that this was put into effect. You remember, Nancy?
That provision was in here?
No, this provision is here. It's already in there. We didn't change anything. What I read there is right in the bylaw today.
But it's marked as a change.
No, this is already, again, all I was doing was putting it in the definition section. Okay? I didn't change a thing on it. That's just the way it is. And if somebody challenges it, they can easily challenge it and so forth. But that hasn't been the case, at least that's my understanding from the
I
building
think
department.
it's been about 8 years or so.
Yeah, I mean, it's been around, and it seems to work. Fixed equipment, by the way, is a problem in the town. If you remember Johnny's, and then it went to Whole Foods, when they put in the equipment, it exceeded this, and they had to go back and change the equipment. And it was expensive. They had to take off all the fixed equipment off the roof and change it. It's much quieter, and it solved the problem. It does work. Michael, there was one fellow on the noise bylaw. He had a lot of problems with his next door neighbor. It got resolved. So it does work. You know, I said, there's no such thing as being a perfect bylaw. And of course, I wasn't there last time. But in any case, are we all set?
Yeah. Any other questions, board members? So, yeah, it's a public hearing. Anyone care to be heard on this? Mr. Fisher?
Thank you. This is, I listened to Bill Maher, who talks about vampire lies of the Tea Party, which are things that you disprove and they keep coming back. This was roundly defeated, this very same proposal, by a significant majority at town meeting last year. And it was defeated because the overwhelming will of town meeting is that we don't want loud leaf blowers, and that we want effective noise enforcement. And this, whether intended or unintended, pokes
holes through the ability to enforce. I worked with a group of town meeting members. They included Irene Scharf, Richard Nagel, Alyssa Jones, Tommy Vitolo, John Margolis, Carol Caro, all who are interested in doing the opposite of this and expanding the time when leaf blowers are totally banned, expanding Mr. Lebo made some reference to the will of the petitioner of the leaf blower article. Well, here stands the petitioner. And the petitioner's intention was not to limit this only to little things that you carry on your back. It was to limit all leaf blowers. And portable was sort of, this is part of the interface of the two separate pieces of the bylaw. But the leaf blower portion was intended, there's no question, there's no doubt, it was intended to limit the use of leaf blowers as a, and it's only because the noise ordinance speaks of portable leaf blowers that we even have this question. If we were to take this to if this were to be referred to a committee, I think it would be fair that the people who were dissuaded from bringing a warrant article that would seek a total ban of leaf blowers have a significant representation on the committee, and that the scope of the committee be to explore further restrictions on leaf blowers and not just the so-called problems that don't seem to be problems in my mind. The question of emergency, let me go through the problems. The question of emergency generators, an emergency generator is defined in the building code. It's clear what an emergency generator is. It's not an issue. The advisory committee, the advisory subcommittee, I attended the meetings, did some things to, well, it didn't do any harm to add another definition of an emergency generator, but we all know what an emergency generator is. If you have someone on a respirator, if you're a hospital, if someone's going to die because the power is out, that's an emergency generator. If you're, we don't need that change, and that is the one change that's more or less benign. The question of meters, well, a yard and a yard and a meter are sort of the same thing. They're pretty close. But when you get to 100 yards and 100 meters, now you're 10 yards different. The difference between the European standard and the American standard are pretty close. They're only a decibel apart. It's, they're within a margin of error of a decibel or two. But at the measure of whether something is offending or not, that decibel is significant. And as a lawyer, and there are several lawyers on the board who I can speak to, who can speak to this, the ability to enforce a law is limited by the clarity of the law. A law can't have a gray area, because the defense in the gray area is, well, we didn't think we were violating the law. Our European standard said we were okay. Or we weren't sure which standard to use. And the problems that this poses for the poor policeman who's out there, who's had to run back to the station to get the meter, he comes back with the meter, and then he's told, well, it's the wrong meter. We're using the other standard. And, it's just the question of meters, the question of changing the difference between daytime and nighttime to some arbitrary standard. I mean, go out here and look at Washington Street, or look at Washington Street right in the Village, or in Washington Square where I live, when the T's going by, and when the restaurants are open. And the ambient level of the nighttime is very different at 2 in the morning than it is at 12 at night. And it can be very quiet along Beacon Street. If any of you have gone to the airport early in the morning, that's way more than 10 dBs difference between the daytime ambient noise level. So that you could have noise that's significantly quieter than what's than 10 dBs less than the daytime, and have it be really disruptive and wake everyone in the neighborhood. Aside from the fact that a 10 dB difference, well, is it 10 dB difference from the middle of the day when it's pretty quiet? Is it 10 dB difference from the dinner time rush hour? It's a floating target that makes it impossible for the police to enforce. The reason that there is not a warrant article now seeking stricter leaf blower restrictions is that Chief O'Leary met with Irene Scharf and several other town meeting members who were concerned about the inadequacy of enforcement. And these were some of the issues that were addressed. And the idea was to work with for the department to work with, particularly in South Brookline, where it appears that the leaf blowers are more of a problem, to work on enforcement. The passage of amendments that muddy the waters, that take away the clear lines, just makes the job of the police even more difficult. We need a clear line. I think I've spoken to the portable leaf blowers. I don't understand the tiers for the large property owners. If you own large property, you can afford to maintain the property. In fact, wealthy people had estates for thousands of years and managed to take care of the leaves without leaf blowers until the last 25 or 30 years. And having bigger, louder leaf blowers. When I was before this board some years ago passing the original leaf blower warrant article, there was an appeal to exempt large property owners because most of them were institutional owners, and it was a huge mistake because it creates a huge loophole, pun intended. Leaf blowers are a bad idea for the environment. They're a bad idea for the neighborhoods. They're a bad idea for carbon emissions that are absolutely, people say there are not a lot of carbon emissions, but there are things that, whatever carbon emissions they emit, they're unnecessary carbon emissions, and leaf blowers are one of them. The idea of using leaf blowers to blow snow is one of the most absurd ways. Let's figure out a way that we can overtly and deliberately destroy our planet. I mean, leaf blowers aren't an effective way to remove snow, and if you've seen, like I have, how they're used sometimes to remove snow, they're used the same way they're used on Beacon Street to blow little bits of dust off because someone's too lazy to get a broom, and because they must have some sort of macho image. But they make a lot of noise, they blow up a lot of dust, they blow more dust around than they sweep up. And they're not an effective tool, and they're not effective for leaves, let alone blowing dust in the summertime or blowing snow in the winter. That's not an appropriate use. It's not an appropriate use for fossil fuel, and the intent of the ordinance is undermined by the four proposals here. I would ask that the selectmen vote no action. And if there is a referral to a committee, that the committee be a broad enough committee that it consider changes that would impose the further restrictions upon leaf blowers that are the will of town meeting.
Thank you. Selectman Daley.
Yeah, I just have a comment on that because Mr. Lebo is correct that in section 18.15.6, D, fixed plant equipment, it does say the 10 decibel below, the nighttime is assumed to be 10 decibels below daytime background noise.
That's for fixed equipment. That's not for partiers out in the street. That's not for car engines that are revving. That's not for loud parties. It's for fixed equipment.
Okay, but I'm saying if you don't like that standard, then you should be urging us to set up this committee to review whether that's the correct standard.
Well, that's what I'm asking,
I think you're urging us not to set up the committee, though.
I am, but if the
confused.
committee's going to be, if there is going to be a committee, that it be a broad committee that, that include, hopefully not myself, but town meeting members who are seeking, such as Irene Sharfin, who are looking to broaden the restrictions on leaf blowers and noise.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Just a comment. I have just discovered the town of Lincoln actually has had a leaf blower study group in action and are reporting to the 2014 town meeting. So it seems to me I'm more in favor of referral to a study group because there may be new information that was not available when these bylaws were drafted. And it's clearly a point of great concern and controversy. I'm not suggesting that there be, I'm not saying that I think it needs to be a group that represents the cross-section of the concerns and interests in the community, but it's a complicated enough matter that it might be better addressed with some thoughtful longitudinal study as opposed to a debate at town meeting where what we hear is the sort of compressed arguments, and I'd really like there to be some thought given to this and try to get it right. I mean, we've got a framework to start with, but it seems to me that there is something better that we could do.
I hear what you're saying and what Selectman Daley is saying, and I think you're suggesting what I'm suggesting, which is that the committee be a broad committee that look at all directions that this may be improved. Thank you.
Anything further from Mr. Fisher? Mr. Richmond, do you?
Good evening. My name is Clint Richmond, Town Meeting Member Precinct 6, and co-chair of the Green Caucus. I just wanted to say that the last town meeting, the Green Caucus, among others, opposed the article when it was brought last time. So I think if there were obvious problems, that the petitioners and so forth would be recognizing them and suggesting them themselves. I agree with Selectman Daley, DeWitt, that it's difficult to have these debates at town meeting. But I just want to go on record as saying that the Green Caucus was strongly in favor of including push mowers, push blowers in this. So as Mr. Fisher indicated, there are issues of actually strengthening this. So anything for exemptions would be the wrong direction, and I don't think should be part of the charter of such a committee. So I just wanted to add that comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Anything further, members of the board? Thank you, everyone. We'll be taking this up for a vote in coming weeks. Article 10, mandate for recycling for commercial properties. Is the petitioner here? Please come right to the podium. If you would, please introduce yourself and tell us about what you hope to accomplish.
My name is Alan Christ. I'm a town meeting member in Precinct 4. And basically, well, first, but before I begin, I thought it might be beneficial for the Board of Selectmen to hear SWAC's recommendation and the advisory committee's reconsideration before you vote and take a position on this. That said, I can jump into a quick summary of the warrant article here and intent of it. Recycling is one of Brookline's most concrete markers of its commitment to sustainability, and the recycling bins that we see in our streets every day are a reminder that our residents have, really committed to reducing their carbon footprint and being greener. But the residential program has kind of plateaued in recent years, and so the goal of this warrant article is to find a way to figure out what the next step is for Brookline in terms of reducing its carbon footprint and increasing recycling. So with this in mind, the goal of the warrant article is to improve the quantity and quality of the town's recycling product by requiring on-site recycling separation for Brookline businesses. And currently, Massachusetts state law already requires businesses to recycle per 310 CMR section 19.017 waste bans, which regulates the disposal of restricted materials, which include but are not limited to glass, paper, cans, in addition to many other materials. However, the law does not require separation of recyclables on site. It simply limits the amount of banned materials in any given hauler's load, which arrive at a solid waste transfer station, to between 10 and 30% of this load. And so while this is positive in its intent, the approach that the state takes does have some drawbacks, and per recent conversations that I've had with Mass DEP and some local recycling haulers, the transfer stations which enforce this law have some difficulties, as they cannot separate trash from recycling at the stations. They can only enforce the law, which results in more rejected loads and potential recyclable material that's taken out of the waste stream, that's not taken out of the waste stream, sorry. And it's often difficult also for the transfer stations to track and find private haulers, because their loads include waste from multiple municipalities. A private hauler may pick up trash in Brookline, and then they go to Cambridge, and then to Watertown, and they take it to a transfer station somewhere else. So it's difficult to follow through. The intent then is to on-site separation. It hopes to address this by making sure that the businesses are separating the material on site beforehand, so it's easier for the private haulers, and it's easier to track, and it's therefore improving the quality of the product. So in terms of what the regulations, what would actually change in the town, the changes themselves are very simple. The existing Article 8.16, which governs the town's recycling program, the residential recycling program would be modified to just add "and commercial" to the requirements. In addition, there's some change in the language to clarify that the requirement would apply to both public and private haulers to ensure that everyone complies. This will give DPH and DPW, which enforce the recycling law, more freedom to define regulations, which they believe to be appropriate and fair, rather than taking a top-down approach. And so in essence, what we're trying to do here is have a very simple warrant article in terms of the language, but this is then refined during the implementation process, where DPW and DPH sit down and rewrite the town's regulations within a defined one-year period, as specified in the warrant article. And just a few other points here I wanted to quickly make. Brookline would not be the first town in Massachusetts to require commercial recycling. Right now, Cambridge, Hingham, Somerville, and Northampton have laws on the books with business recycling programs, and they have different requirements in each municipality. Some have requirements for educating local businesses or developing business recycling plans, and these are all things that could be visited during the development of the regulations for this. And so finally, I didn't want to overlook the a larger point of this warrant article, and it's doing the right thing for Brookline as a means to improve the community's health, environment, and quality of life. Increasing the quantity and quality of recyclable materials from the commercial sector will directly reduce greenhouse gas emissions while also reducing methane emissions in landfills. Additionally, the use of recycled materials can then be used in other phases of product production. So in April 2013, the Selectmen's Climate Action Committee added mandatory business recycling to its current climate action plan, which indicates its commitment to moving ahead with commercial recycling in the town.
How does this work for landlords? You know, one of the differences between residential and commercial, to me, is that most commercial enterprises are renters and are, you know, like in an office situation, is in a big office building, where the landlord is the one who's disposing of the trash. So would this require not only the tenant, the office, to separate their disposables into two different, into recycling and non-recycling, but also would it reach the landlords?
So currently, I think the way the 2004 changes to Article 8.16, which required recycling in apartment buildings, that they kind of mirror some of the way this would be structured. They're also, you know, you have multiple units with a property manager, which is often the case with businesses too. And in Article 8.16 right now, the businesses are responsible for administering the plan on site. So they're educating their tenants about the regulations.
Well, hold on for a second. So you said the businesses, but the businesses are the tenants.
I misspoke. The property managers. I'm sorry.
Okay. So how would a group of tenants in an office building, for example, how would they be able to get their landlord to do this, given that they're all in the middle of leases right now? Each
year, you know, when their lease is renewed, it's similar to the way they currently deal with trash pickup. You know, they have a set of regulations that are in place when a tenant moves into a space, and it's a part of their lease, understanding the guidelines for trash and recycling pickup, and each year, you know, the property manager has to assess, you know, their contracts with private haulers and whatnot, and pass that information on to their tenants. So in many ways, it's similar to the residential program.
I didn't see, unless I missed it, where you're aiming this bylaw at the landlords. I think that's what needs to happen, though.
Sorry. Okay.
Well, maybe 816.5, is that?
Yeah, it's in 816.5. All owners, landlords, and property managers of residential and commercial buildings, as the warrant article is written, shall set up systems for the collection, storage, and removal of recyclables generated by the occupants and residents in their buildings. So it's written very similar to the residential program, and I think many of the challenges that come up will be similar to what multifamily apartment buildings experience. Not that they are identical. There will be some different issues that need to be worked out. The waste stream, I think, for restaurants in particular and certain types of businesses are different, and they obviously require more pickups per week than a residence does, and so that's part of the reason right now that businesses use private haulers, because rather than the town service, because they're able to provide more pickups per week.
All right. Can I just suggest, in talking about this, you were talking about the businesses. I think you should be talking about really the landlords themselves, though.
It happens on both levels. I mean, the landlords pass this information on to the tenants, and some businesses also own their own space. You know, it's not, there's some overlap between these things. But yes, it's true.
Questions, board members?
I
Selectman
actually
Daley?
have some questions for the commissioner. So, Mr. Chris mentioned, like, businesses choosing between the town service and private haulers, but I thought we didn't provide pickup service for businesses.
We do offer it. It's their choice to either go private or municipal, but you have to realize that if they choose municipal, there's only one pickup per week.
Okay.
And generally, most of them decide on private because of the multiple pickups.
Okay. Well, I did have one local business owner saying to me a while ago that they were separating their recyclables from their garbage, and they were having to pay to get all their recyclables taken away. And they were asking me, since I believe the town still makes money on cardboard, and they were saying, we have a lot of cardboard, and if the town would come by and pick up our cardboard, that would save us money, and, you know, the cost of picking it up might be, might offset the, you know, since the town actually makes some money on that aspect of.
I'm not really sure that we're still making money on cardboard.
Oh, okay.
The paper market kind of fell through dropped through the floor a few years ago, so we would have to look at each specific instance, I think.
Okay. And I believe you've told me before that some material that we recycle actually is not really recycled because there's no market for it.
That's correct. All the recycling is, especially on single stream recycling, is sent for processing. If the recycler feels if there is a market for a particular material, say number 6 styrofoam or whatever, or number 6 plastic or whatever, then he processes that for the market. If there isn't, many times they stockpile the material in case the market rebounds. If there's no likelihood that that's going to happen, then yes, it's incinerated.
Okay. Well, what are your thoughts on this warrant article? Do you think it's there are things to be worked out through a selectmen's committee, or do you think that it's clear as is?
The DPW in general supports the intent of the article. It's kind of like, you know, apple pie and Thanksgiving. I mean, you cannot say you're not going to support the article. We want to raise the bar on recycling. We want to get all the material that we can get and save and reuse. But we believe that there's some problems in the way it's written. We don't believe that by simply adding the word commercial to the existing bylaw that gives us enough support to provide the proper enforcement. We would like to be able to enforce a commercial recycling ordinance or bylaw, but I don't think just adding the word commercial to this bylaw does that. We would be more in favor of having the selectmen form a committee or sending it to a committee that could look at a lot of different issues. Commercial waste pickup and recycling is a lot different than residential waste pickup and recycling, and don't let anybody tell you that it's the same. It's not the same. There are problems that exist in commercial pickup that are not generally there in residential pickup. There are different, it requires different strategies for enforcement. We need the proper time, I believe, given the proper backup of a properly worded warrant article or a bylaw that will give us the tools to do this the right way. I don't think that just adding the word commercial to this existing bylaw gives us the proper tools. I would really like to look at it and study it a little bit longer. You need some input, I think, from the commercial folks, from the Chamber of Commerce. You know, there are space issues at commercial places about on-site storage, on-site, if you're going to require them to separate on-site, that raises a lot of different issues with the commercial establishment. So we support the intent of this article. We don't think the article as it's written provides us with the tools that we'll need to actually go out and enforce it, and think that it requires more study.
Thank you.
So, can I follow-up question, please? Commissioner, you probably have given this one some thought. Are there enforcement issues to do with our current residential, and I'm really thinking of the questions Selectman Goldstein raised about the commercial property owners with tenants. Have there been enforcement issues around the multi-unit properties where it's not a single family or a two-family or whatever?
Yeah, of course, we always have issues with compliance with the code and the bylaw with all of our customers. You know, we do enforcement, but we're dealing generally on the residential side with the landowners, the property owners. Because if we levy fines, the only ability that we have to collect those fines, of course, is through the lien process. And that's what we use for all of our fees and our fee structures. So, yeah, we do step up enforcement on the residential side, but we're dealing with the landlords.
Okay, but you have a sort of model that you could use for commercial properties that
absolutely.
is similar to what you do with multi-unit residential buildings.
Yes, as a matter of fact, we've given this particular article a lot of thought already, and have already started working on guidelines and procedures that we would put in place to be able to enforce this in terms of you know, requiring commercial establishments through the owner of the property to provide us with a recycling plan. We do now require information about who their permitted hauler is. So as part of that process, we would want them to provide a recycling plan along with that, and also perform a waste audit of their facility so that we know what types of material they're generating in the first place. Those are the types of tools that we need to be able to do an adequate job at enforcing this.
Okay. Thank you.
Selectman Franco.
I have to admit, I'm a little confused. I heard Mr. Chris say that what this bylaw seeks to do is current state law, that businesses are currently required to recycle. And I hear you saying that you need to figure out the enforcement provision. So is it not currently state law? And if it is state law, are we not enforcing state law now? Can you just sort of connect the dots?
He's referring to the waste, the general law that speaks of a waste ban. In other words, the state does ban certain items from going into the waste stream, and that most definitely is state law. We generally don't have the ability to enforce that with a commercial establishment that is using a private hauler. You know, the private hauler knows that it's state law. I assume that the property owner knows it's state law, but we have no mechanism as the town to be able to enforce that, and I think that's the issue here.
Selectman Waschinsky.
Yeah, I was just looking up City of Cambridge's regulations, and they're actually quite specific as to what's required of landlords, and it gets into the different kinds of leases. So that's certainly a model. You know, we don't have to invent the wheel here.
But that's exactly what I'm talking about. Adding the word commercial just to the existing bylaw doesn't do it, as far as I'm concerned.
But that's implemented in regulations. Their bylaw, as far as I can tell, is quite simple. Yeah, this is the kind of thing, it's, as you said, it's kind of like apple pie and mom, and
it's good, great to do. How are you going to do it?
Yeah. I'd be very interested in some feedback from the business community on the practicalities of it, at least in the short run. But I think...
I'm sure you're going to hear that.
Yeah, irrespective of what we hear, I think the business community should be preparing to do this. You know, we do it on the residential side, and it's turned out not to be a giant burden, I think.
If I could just say one word, and I'll sit down. You know, Brookline is pretty close to 7 or 8% commercial, 90+% residential. You know, when we talk about recycling, we get the biggest bang for our buck in the residential side of it. That's not to say it shouldn't be across the board. It should be across the board. Residential recycling has indeed plateaued, and I'm going to be coming before you in the very near future to talk about that and what I think is the next step to raise the bar on how we get higher up in terms of that percentage of recycled materials. And we have a plan to do that. This perhaps will get us closer to it in the long run, but I don't think it does it right now. So we have some ideas that you'll find interesting in the near future.
Thank you. Anything else for the commissioner? It's a public hearing. Anyone care to be heard on this matter? Yes. Mr. Richmond.
Hi, Celinda Shannon, Executive Director of the Brookline Chamber of Commerce, and I'd really have to echo the Commissioner's sentiments. I think the Chamber and the business community is largely in favor of commercial recycling, and again, as the Commissioner said, I think the whole concern is how this process is going to work and what is the cost to the businesses, what is the space available. There's too many logistical questions at this time, and I think I know within the Chamber Board we're just kind of mulling and thinking and wondering how this is logistically going to take place and to what extent and what expense to the business community. So, you know, we're sort of waiting for more information, and I think we would look for more information on how this could work. But I think the general intent too of the businesses is, yes, it's a good idea, and we would like to, you know, move forward at some point, but just to have a better understanding of how we can do that.
I would like to ask you a question. We have implemented plastic bag replacement, I guess is what I'm going to say, for which we passed a bylaw, and there was a kind of plan on how it would be incorporated into the bylaw. And so is what you're suggesting that there should be something comparable, a discussion about an implementation plan, and have language in the bylaw that would, in effect, I'm going to say authorize implementation?
I think that would be acceptable, you know, to come up with some sort of language like the plastic bag did, you know, with possible extensions if people haven't been able to figure out an option or a plan based on space or whatever that is. I think it's a little more complicated, obviously, than plastic bags, but
sure, but at least we did figure out that we could do it with plastic bags.
Right, right.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. Anything further? Thank you.
Okay.
Mr. Richmond?
Successfully jockeyed for that last word.
I'll be here all night. Clint Richmond, town meeting member, Precinct 6, and also a member of the Solid Waste Advisory Committee, thanks to you. I'm also speaking, again, as co-chair of the Green Caucus on this issue. As you can hear, there's a lot of unanimity around wanting to accomplish this goal, so I think that's good. I commend Mr. Chrisman and the DPW for working together, and I'm very confident that we will be able to solve this problem. I just want to give a little historical background, though, that will sort of explain my posture vis-a-vis this warrant article. It was in 2004 that we extended recycling to the residential community. We've had 10 years of experience with it. It's gone very well. The Green Caucus has been discussing business recycling since its inception, and I should add that at the same time that the town extended recycling to residences, which were not on town service, there was some discussion then, as I understand it, about, you know, oh, should we be doing this for the business as well? And they decided to hold off. But you can see a lot of time has elapsed, and we haven't had any follow-up on this issue, which is unfortunate, because this idea is now part of our climate action plan, and it was adopted in the spring of 2013, so it's already been 18 months. The business community was, of course, aware of this issue at that time when they saw it was added to the Climate Action Plan. They reached out to me because I was involved in getting it added to the Climate Action Plan, but it is also an idea that had been discussed long before I was a town meeting member about, should as part of our climate goals be pursuing more aggressively recycling within the business community. So at that time also, the Solid Waste Advisory Committee discussed the fact that it was being brought before the Climate Action Committee and, how was SWAC going to respond. We decided to do a survey in conjunction with the Planning Department, and a large number of businesses responded to that survey. You can ask questions of Ms. Bruton if you'd like more information about it. So they've been aware of it for 18 months already. So the mantra has been, and I think the Commissioner would agree, not just if, but when. The Green Caucus, I think, though, is feeling some urgency on this issue, especially as it will have, as I said, a measurable positive impact on our CO2 footprint, and to bring our businesses into a similar standard as our residences. And I think this is brought home, by things like even the New York City rally last month, which some of us participated in. So we've heard that it's conceptually very simple, and the bylaw is very simple. We've heard about other cities and towns that have implemented this. Cambridge, as you mentioned, which has a much larger commercial waste problem than Brookline, has been able to do this. So I think some of the difference perhaps from the Green Caucus is going to be, and we haven't voted yet, we won't vote until the 19th, but is in the timetable. So we're concerned that if this goes to a committee, that this will slow down the schedule. And we've had experience with pay-as-you-throw, which is not something we want to emulate for this issue, which we hope won't be as contentious. But as you can see, there are some issues, but I don't think they're insurmountable. I think that passing a bylaw now will give notice and commitment and a schedule to our business community, and they want certainty, and I think will increase engagement by the business community, where you said, oh, we're going to form a committee, would you like to be on it, we're going to be doing this. We don't know when it'll happen. I don't think that's a model for increasing participation. And if the DPW would like to amend the current warrant article, I mean, they could do that, and they've had the opportunity to do that. But I have full faith and confidence, really, that our skilled DPW professionals can implement this within a year deadline, which I don't think is an unreasonable one. And I think the bylaw provides regulatory flexibility. I hadn't heard anything from my discussions, and we discussed this at the last SWAC meeting. We didn't have a hearing, but we presented the article, as many committees and organizations do, sort of as in preparation for our hearing, which will be on the 21st. That the best solution for this would be through regulation, not through trying to freeze it in a bylaw. So I think the approach that's been outlined is a good one, and I would caution against the natural instinct, I think, to want to refer this to a committee.
Thank you.
And in any case, I would urge you not to vote on this issue as a board until after the Solid Waste Advisory Committee is meeting on the 21st anyway, so that we can at least provide the advice that I know you always like to hear from us.
Selectman Daley?
If the recommendation was not, as the advisory committee has said, to report back to the Board of Selectmen no later than the 2015 Fall Town Meeting, but to report back to the Board of Selectmen in time to submit a warrant article for, say, the spring 2015 town meeting, and giving us time perhaps to address some of the commissioners' concerns, would that make you more comfortable?
Yes, I guess if we were still aiming for a one-year timetable, I just don't know whether, developing and having 6 months will do that. If you think that that's an achievable goal, I think that's something we could work with. But as I said, starting in 2004, it's been over 10 years. We're trying to not delay it further if we can help it.
Selectman Franco?
Just to pick up on Selectman Daley's comment, it's my understanding the advisory committee may reconsider their vote at a future meeting.
Yeah, there's been a little bit of confusion. I mean, as with any bylaw or warrant article, certain facts come out in different hearings, and that's part of the power of the process. But the original motion to refer to a committee was based on some information that was since corrected and clarified. The person who brought that was Mr. Salmon, and he said that if he had had that information, he never would have even moved referral. So there's been a little few bumps in the road, shall we say.
Let me ask you a question, Mr. Richmond. I think what I heard you say is pass the bylaw now, and that'll hold people's feet to the fire.
Not feet to the fire. I think you've heard that the business community already wants to do this. They want to know when. And we've already received letters of support from the business community, including members of the Washington Square Business Association, in support of that there are businesses, maybe 50% who've already implemented this. So we're just really trying to get the last half into the regime here.
I will just say, though, that while I know a number of businesses, as I said, that are already paying to have their recycling taken away and very conscientious on this issues, I do know of at least one that, state law notwithstanding, does not bother to do a lot of recycling. So I do think that the town having the ability to enforce this law is going to be important, and that's why I'm concerned when I hear the commissioner say he doesn't feel that we're there yet. So I think
that could be the subject of amendment, I believe.
We could write something better.
One issue that has come up that we've discussed at SWAC is that maybe the fines wouldn't be high enough. I don't know whether, it's really fines that are going to be driving this. I mean, it's not, the intent is not to be punitive. And I think that any business that's cited, even for a $50 or $25 fine, as we've seen with the plastic bags, we haven't even had to issue any. No business manager wants to receive any kind of, instructions from the town, regardless of the amount. And, warnings are fine. I think we have enough tools, but the regulation process, I think, would suffice to address those concerns.
So I've got a follow-up then. What regulation process do you have in mind?
I have to defer to Mr. Chrisman or the commissioner on the existing infrastructure for fines.
Okay, but see, I'm not aware of a regulation with regard to recycling.
I believe there's one for the residential sector, and
well,
the
there's
same
a
schedule
bylaw. It's the same bylaw.
I don't know. Is the Commissioner, I defer to the Commissioner, Mr. Chrisman, who are more expert on the fine structure for this.
Well,
Commissioner, is there a regulation?
I don't know of any yet on the commercial,
Well, to parallels them. Even if we implemented the exact same schedule as for residences, I believe the bylaw refers to that.
The bylaw right now is strictly residential. There's not, that's cut and dry, it's residential. It doesn't refer at all to commercial.
But what you were saying earlier is that the circumstances for commercial disposal are different.
I believe that they are
sufficiently different that they need different treatment, or at least targeted treatment.
For us to properly enforce on-site recycling at commercial areas, I think requires a little different approach. Yes.
If the bylaw had language saying that there would be authority to establish regulations, would that help you?
Perhaps.
It has that.
Perhaps.
Well, that's what I'm, if that might be sufficient.
It may be, but I thought that this was a good opportunity. I thought this would be a good opportunity to get all the parties together, because from our conversations with the business community, I'm not hearing the whole kumbaya thing that Mr. Richmond is hearing. It gives everybody an opportunity to get together and sit down and figure this out the right way. You're going to do it, let's do it right.
Okay, and I'm not really disagreeing with you. I'm just trying to figure out if we need a committee or if we could modify the bylaw in such a way that you could achieve your goal.
Perhaps it would work either way, as long as we had the opportunity to actually sit down and put it together.
Right, and I guess I'm still going back to the plastic bag bylaw as kind of in my head. It was in the reg, it was written into the bylaw.
But that was written in, that there was
it was written in.
Time
That's my
period
point.
before it started.
Yeah,
and everything. Commissioner, do you think that it would be reasonable to assume that we could have a bylaw ready for the spring town meeting?
Yeah, anything's possible. We have a lot on our plate relative to solid waste in the next several months. Hopefully, when we have that conversation with you, we're going to be moving forward on some other initiatives that are going to take a lot of time, that are going to require a very large culture change in the community, which is why I was a little apprehensive about the timing of this whole issue about putting too much out there at once relative to recycling. So,
Due to your staff
I have no problem with a
constraints.
one-year implementation period. I think that that's doable. I'm not so sure that that 6 months is going to work.
Well, but there still could be, we could, I think there's two factors here. One is, do we send this to a committee to work on this bylaw a little more before presenting it to town meeting? There still could be some time frame in there before it was fully operational with the businesses. When we did the plastic bag one, there was a time period in there to do the outreach, to do the education, to let people get rid of, use up the plastic bags they had before they were going to have to make this switch. So, I mean, conceivably, that kind of language could go into a bylaw.
I agree, and if it was the board's decision to include in this bylaw change the ability for us to promulgate regulations that would get the program done, along with, say, a one-year implementation period, I think we could work with that.
Thank you. Selectman Waschinsky, I thought you had something.
Yeah, I was actually going to go down the road that Selectman Daley just went down, but I think through this discussion, I get a sense of that's from the board and from just what I know about town meeting, that whether it's this year or next year, this recycling for the commercial sector is coming. So I would just put the word out there, start preparing one way or another, and I would like to see it sooner rather than later.
Okay. Anything further? Anyone? Thanks.
One more thing, Clint Richmond again, that the warrant article already has a one-year implementation period. The effective date is December 1st of 2015, and Mr. Christ originally arrived at that, I believe, in consultation with DPW. So, one bag is what 1 year is what we allowed for the plastic bags. I think 1 year is a reasonable schedule.
Thank you. Anything further? Let's move on now to warrant Article 13, which is zoning ZBA notifications. I saw Ms. Snyder here a few minutes ago. Yep. Ms. Nabel, yep, you're up. Good evening, Bobby. Tell us about warrant Article 13, please.
I think I'll start with some background. Ruth Ann Snyder and I became involved in this issue in 2011 when she was asked for advice by a constituent in her precinct involving the intention of the owner of the top two floors of a condo to create two separate units. In fact, 2 units had already been in existence despite a determination by the building department some years before that they were illegal and should be dismantled. In 2011, a fire broke out in the illegal kitchen, damaging the upper floors. The owner denied a building permit to rebuild 2 separate units, appealed the decision to the ZBA. So that was the start. A hearing before the ZBA was held in the early part of 2011 and was continued. The case was heard in July 2011 and continued again, with no date certain to be resumed. I attended that hearing in July, and although I checked the site for minutes of all ZBA hearings in 2011. There are no references to that particular appeal, no description of the hearing, of continuances granted, or of final disposition. So I know only, or I would know from what I could have access to at that time, that the appeal was brought in the early months of 2011, and at least one continuance granted before the hearing I attended in July. Another continuance was granted at that hearing, and to my knowledge, no decision was rendered by the ZBA, and there is a question about whether the appeal has been withdrawn. I could find no reference to that particular appeal in any of the online ZBA minutes for 2011 or any for 2012. Not the original hearing, nor any of the continuances, nor of any final disposition. At this point, or at that point, it was as if neither the appeal or the hearing had occurred. Sometime in 2012, I asked for and received a copy of the July 2011 minutes from the town clerk, but they were not available online, and as recently as today, are still not. In 2013, a selectman found a letter in the ZBA file stating that the appeal had been withdrawn. No notification of that fact was made available to the public, and when Ruth Ann spoke to the town clerk, he called the appellant's attorney to verify the withdrawal and was told that the attorney had no intention of withdrawing and that the continuance was still in effect. It is for the uncertainties surrounding that particular instance that we began this process. Our warrant article is intended to correct what we experienced as hindrances in the public's efforts for town meeting members to be informed about and to participate in the public process regarding ZBA proceedings. And that's not only the town meeting members, but it is certainly also the town residents. We've spoken to town council, to the building department, and the planning department about our primary concerns, and have had actually very encouraging responses. We drafted the warrant article last year and withdrew it with an assurance that continuances would be granted only with a date certain, and that has been followed since that time. It was hoped that some of the other issues raised in our warrant article, having to do with the notification of interested parties, would already be dealt with by now. But changes in the staffing and responsibilities among the town clerk, planning, and building departments delayed taking on some of those issues, which are now in progress. So there are conversations. I know that a person has been hired to do the notification in these instances, and there has been a very welcoming response by those offices to the conversations that we've had about our concerns. I want to say one thing. We had said in the warrant article that we wanted minutes to be done by 21 days. We found out that for a number of reasons that is not necessarily a reasonable expectation. That in fact the way that the ZBA operates as a commission and the fact that it does not have constant or consistent membership for each of its members may delay the approval of minutes. It's also true for us that while we think that there should be some expectation of definite time about when they will be posted, 21 days is not necessarily that definite time, and that it's important for us to do some further discussion with planning to see when they think that's possible. Town meeting members are supposed to receive notifications of ZBA hearings relating to their precincts. Unfortunately, town meeting members automatically receive notification of all hearings. And the only way that they know whether a matter involves their precinct is to open the mailing. If meeting notices were to include the precincts involved in the email address, it would simplify the notification process for the planning board and ZBA and make it easier for town meeting members to see which matters relate to their precincts. So, in a sense, what we're hoping for is support for the intention of this warrant article. We are hoping that the conversations that we've been having with the various departments, with discussions about what's possible, what's doable by their department, and what addresses the concerns that we feel that residents and town members may have about communication between them and the departments, can be resolved in the conversations that we're having, and would hope then by the time town meeting comes that we would be able to recommend no action on this particular warrant article because we will have resolved the issues.
Selectman Daley.
Yeah, I'm very sympathetic to your goals. I was concerned that you were asking for mailed notices because we have, you know, it seems like we're constantly asking our different departments to do more with fewer staff members. And while, you know, if we can agree on some type of email notification that would be appropriate, I think that's relatively low expense to the town and, you know, doable. Having somebody get a mailing together, you know, sort of makes the issue more difficult, so.
I think there are only 12 town meeting members who don't have email addresses. I think one of the things that we would suggest is that when people attend meetings that they leave their email address and indicate that they want notification for future meetings. I don't think that it's something that we feel is essential to have it mailed, but we do think that the notification of the process and what's happened is essential.
But if I'm hearing you correctly, you're saying that emails with some indication this property is in precinct whatever,
right,
is what you would find useful.
I think that would satisfy ours. It would mean that the town meeting member would not have to look through all of them to find out, and it would mean that it would be relatively simple for the department to add that to the hearing notice. Should say that. One of the things I checked was that the notifications now are only by date. There's no indication of what the subject is, or has been in the past. There, I think, has begun very recently to give some indication that this applies to Hancock Village. But I looked at the minutes 8 in a row, which were listed by dates. All of those actually related to Hancock Village, but there was no notification of that. So in order to find out what happened on those dates, I would have to go through each one individually.
Can you help me here? Because I'm not quite understanding. The minutes exist, and the notification should do what?
The minutes are posted at various times, and that makes sense.
Right.
Apparently, one of the things that is the hindrance is that in order to get approval of the minutes by, say, the ZBA, you need responses from those people who participated in the particular hearing. That you can't always get that because the meetings, the same people aren't always present at successive meetings.
You're saying the ZBA members are
right.
different at each meeting, are not always the same at each meeting?
That's
okay.
right. So,
so the 3 members sitting on a case will change even though, no, sorry, as I understand it, the same 3 members sit on every case, but the members may change from case to case.
Yes,
Okay.
and also, if you were to set a particular deadline for having people look at the minutes, the next meeting time might not have the commission members who are the same as were there before. So you have to leave latitude for those members to be given a chance to read and correct the minutes.
Selectman Waschinsky?
I was glad to hear that you're looking to solve the problem as opposed to the solution that you're proposing in the bylaw, which is perhaps a little bit of overkill. I'm thinking in terms, say, Hancock Village, where we've been having once or twice a month hearings, and every hearing is a continuance, and we'd have to do all these mailings, twice a month, which doesn't sound feasible. But I think the goal of being able to find out what's going on, the status of a case that you're interested in, that should be, I would hope, easily solvable. And so what I'm really curious is to whether the town clerk's office or the planning department keeps a docket of ZBA cases that can be posted on the website, so you can just go right to the website, you look at the case you're interested in, and you see, yeah, continued until X date, or a decision on Y date, and then when the decision is written, perhaps there can be a link to it. A lot of government agencies are doing stuff like that.
Yeah, I think I have some questions for Ms. Steinfeld about what can be done. Because I know even before I got on this board, so it's been many years now, we were trying to set up a system where there might be you might identify a property, and you could go on our website and you could find out, well, they filed this on this date, then they went to the planning board, and then they went to this, and they're scheduled for the zoning board of appeals here. And, we were suggesting this many years ago, as I'm saying, and I'm wondering, when we're going to get to that point, and how close we are now. Because this was we were talking about different departments, like.
I know you can do that with building permits and
yeah, but we'd like
permits.
to have the whole thing, right. Like you could say, such and such, you could, go onto our website, you could look up such and such a property, and you could find out all of those steps. So how close are we?
I'm not aware of that specific proposal.
Oh, well, this was many years ago.
Yeah, I wasn't here many years ago, so. But if I could just make a few comments on the proposed article. First of all, I certainly agree with the intent of the article, and I certainly appreciate the petitioner's willingness to work with the planning department and the building department to effect some changes. As a matter of fact, the need for improvements is why both the building commissioner and I recommended that the responsibility for staffing the ZBA be transferred to the planning department, and that we create and hire a zoning coordinator. Since the responsibility has transferred to the planning department as of July 1, we've made a number of improvements. First and foremost, we've hired a zoning coordinator as of September 2nd, and I'm very pleased that we've hired a very good candidate. He's a planner and is very willing to learn, very anxious to make improvements. Also, in conjunction with the building department, we've made some changes to the rules and regulations of the Zoning Board of Appeals. And again, this is since July 1st. We will not continue cases any longer to an indefinite date. There will be a time specific. If a matter is withdrawn, the ZBA will actually vote on the withdrawal, which necessitates a written decision. We've also, as we always have, place agendas for both the planning board and the ZBA on the town's website. And now all but 12 of the town meeting members are notified of that. And the remaining 12 members are sent an actual mail by USPS. And also, most recently, we've begun to post a summary of the prior night's meeting, indicating the basic actions of the zoning board, be it anticipated denial, the basic summary. And if we haven't already, we will be putting links to all the information on that notice. And as the petitioner indicated, the minutes are more complicated than we had hoped because the sitting members change. But we have developed a procedure that has been approved by Town's Council, who has confirmed with the Attorney General's office that it is reasonable and legal, and we're just awaiting approval by the Zoning Board of Appeals. And assuming the ZBA approves that process, we will have minutes prepared and approved within 2, maybe 3 weeks, unless there's an issue, in which case it will take longer. So we are making progress. There are any number of issues that we still have to address, including the one that you just raised, that may in fact be addressed, and I'm just not aware of it. But I'm certainly confident that we can improve the system in consultation with the petitioners and improve it, quite honestly, beyond even what the article is proposing, and still retain some flexibility. I mean, maybe some of the changes that we're going to propose won't work, but without a bylaw in place, we can make adjustments. But we do have a full-time zoning board coordinator on staff. He's still learning the process, but has made tremendous strides already. And
precinct numbers on the notice?
Precinct numbers are on. We have to figure out how we put it in the title. IT's been very cooperative, but it turns out we've learned just recently that town meeting members aren't notified automatically, and it's a function of IT. But we're working out those issues. And between IT, building, planning, the petitioners, and anyone else who has suggestions, we're going to improve the process.
Well, now that you've heard the idea of, this was a committee I was on a number of years ago, and we've since changed building commissioners, and you've changed, and a number of people have changed. But I didn't realize the idea had gotten so completely lost in the meantime. But I do think that it is a good idea for people who want to type in, you know, a certain address or something, and be able to know all the steps. You know, they went through the planning process, they went through the zoning board of appeals process, they had a building permit, what's happened, you know, actions on that. And if there's some central location you could go and find all that information, it would be, I think, what people are looking for.
I think it's a terrific idea, and I don't want to suggest that the idea has been lost. It's just that I'm not aware of it. And I also like the idea of posting. We do, in fact, have a matrix, and if we could work it out and we could put that on, that would be great.
Well, I would love to be able to recommend no action for the reason that you've worked with the petitioner and improved the process.
I'll say that the zoning bylaw review committee reached that same conclusion. Right. Selectman DeWitt.
I've just randomly went to the website, and I'm looking at what is described as minutes of the meeting on September 18th, this September 18th. And what I see here, what I read is cases. I don't see a decision. I don't even know what was requested. So I have an address, description of the proposal. It does not say what, if any, relief was required. And then it says board decision approved subject to conditions, but I have no clue what those conditions are or how they affect that particular project. So I don't know what level the minutes are supposed to be, but I'm certainly wouldn't find this satisfying.
These are not intended as minutes.
It's just a brief listed on, so this is what you were describing as a brief summary, even though on the...
we're talking about the same thing.
I don't know.
These are the interim minutes.
What I'm seeing is on the website, they're minutes. It's just called minutes. I just picked one.
Then they should not be addressed as minutes, because quite honestly, there haven't been minutes done for quite some time, with the exception of Hancock Village.
Okay. Then I know you are doing your best to make an improvement, but these, actually, the document itself, just to be clear, doesn't have a header that says minutes. I found it where I clicked on minutes. It came up. So probably it should say notes or
summary or summary of actions taken.
Yeah, summary of actions, you know, but it's very confusing, would be very confusing to the average person who just went to the site and thought they were getting minutes, that these clearly are not. That's all.
Okay, we can certainly address that. I think it
Yeah,
may have
I
been
think
the first and
labeling
only
is
time.
probably, maybe just a question of having a different category for updates or some other thing, or if it's actually on the document itself in such a way that you know it isn't minutes.
Actually, what we were planning on doing is post the summary the next day, and when the minutes are done, leave the summary and then add the minutes, so that you don't have to read through the whole.
Okay, and maybe the way to deal with this would be to say minutes will be posted, or something that gives a person who knows considerably less than I do, which is not enough, to read this thinking it is the minutes. You want that person to know it's not the minutes. You want that person to know minutes are coming, or something like that. And I guess the other piece of it that I've always found very confusing is what is the decision, and maybe even a little narrative on the ZBA website that explains how something about the decision process.
Well, actually, we were discussing the idea of doing a sort of how-to,
Yeah,
ZBA
right,
how-to.
right.
And what the
FAQs,
process is.
something like that
Right.
would really, really help.
Yeah.
Because for the average layperson, I think this is really hard to understand.
Right. Two things. One is the actual decisions tend to take a bit longer in that they.
I know they're
Right.
given 20 days or something like that to do a decision, or isn't there a time?
There's a time limit, but they
Yeah.
have to be approved by the
Right,
chairman, so sometimes it goes
right.
beyond the time limit.
Right.
But also, I have a more recent version of one of those summaries, and it does in fact address some of your concerns.
Okay,
So it's
good.
evolving and improving over time.
Good.
Okay. Snyder, sure. Come on up, Ruth, then.
According to the open meeting law, a rough draft of the minutes have to be posted within 10 days. So somewhere on this page that should go by address and not by date, should be a statement that says if the viewer is interested, the rough drafts are available. The rough draft minutes are available within 10 days. It's open meeting law.
Not sure about that. We'll look into that. All right, so public hearing, anyone want to be heard? Mr. Rosenthal?
Yes, actually, I was here primarily for the disorderly article, which we had a hearing downstairs. But I have talked to the petitioners and also Allison about this briefly, and I welcome the idea that this may be done without a bylaw, because bylaws are so hard to change, and the problems are broader. I think just in this process, we've identified things that the petitioners didn't think of, and I think they understand that. And the two things I want to add to the discussions that I hope will be happening the next 2 months are that when a notice goes out for a planning board hearing, and I also welcome the electronic notification, which will tie into what I'm about to say, which is I think that those notices should include a link, and the plan that's going to be discussed should be downloaded and accessible electronically to anyone who wants to see what's going on. When neighbors come in for these, they have to call basically Polly Selco and get her to do every one by one. I think that's crazy in this age, and that stuff should be available electronically. And the next one, the second one, gets into the next step, which is after the planning board does a hearing and a report, and it goes to the ZBA, that report should be made readily accessible in the notice that goes out about the ZBA hearing. And here's a link to the report by the planning board that's going to go to the ZBA. So they'll see the issues as the planning board saw it, and it'll be much easier for neighbors and town meeting members to understand what's going on. You get these notices, and you've all seen them, even I as a town meeting member, and you know, all the stuff I've done, which I won't recite my history, but you know, I can't see from one of these notices what's going on. You have to call Polly, get the plans, etc. So I think there's a lot that can be done in this article. I think will trigger it all, and I'm really grateful that these discussions are going to take place, and everybody, Allison and the petitioners, sounded receptive to this stuff. So that's it.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else care to be heard on this? We're not going to vote this tonight, and for good reason, I think, because I think progress is being made. Thank you. Next is warrant Article 18, resolution in support of domestic workers. Vogel.
It's you, Steve.
Is the petitioner here? What's that? Yep. Come on up, please.
I'm expecting 3 more. 4 more.
Yeah, it's a long night.
Well, thank you. Hi, my name is Steve Vogel. I'm co-chair of the Workmen's Circle's Acting for Economic Justice Committee, and we've been working with the Domestic Workers Campaign, which helped to pass the bill in July, first giving domestic workers who were not hired by agencies, temp agencies, but are kind of in the informal marketplace, who have not had legal rights in this country, in terms of they're not protected by labor laws. And this bill, for the first time, is allowing domestic workers in Massachusetts to have legal protection. The regulations have not been written yet. I don't know if you guys know, but at this point in time, approximately 2/3 of domestic workers earn below the poverty wages, and roughly half of them are the primary wage earners for their families. Many of them, nannies, housekeepers. Some of them they live in the residences that they work. They have no contracts. They can be let go at any moment, at any time, not only losing their job, but also losing their home. What we're asking for is for town meeting to pass a resolution in support of the Domestic Workers Bill of Rights. The purpose of this is to help to educate the public. Once regulations are written, both people who work in the city and employers who hire people that work in the city as domestic workers will need information on what their rights and responsibilities are. And what we hope this passage will get coverage, will help to educate the public. And the only requirements that we believe this resolution will require the town to make would be to help facilitate education. There will be no requests or demands for monetary expenditures, such as in education, it could be anywhere from having the legal document of the requirements on the town's website, literature left in town hall, in libraries, that sort of nature. And if there were parties that wanted to arrange for an educational event to help citizens learn more about this, that the town might help to facilitate having an educational event on town property. So that's the sum total of it, as far as I can tell. Any questions?
Sure, I have one. Isn't it true that a lot of our domestic workers are actually here and working illegally? And how will this Domestic Workers Bill of Rights reach those people?
It's not, I don't know the statistics on how many are undocumented. I don't prefer using the word illegal. Many of them are not undocumented. I'm not a lawyer. I can't really answer that question in as much as I think that just like with other rights that undocumented people do have in the state, that I would argue that that would be the same.
Okay. Questions, board members? No? I don't think you have any questions.
Thank you.
It's pretty simple what you're proposing, so.
Yeah, no, not a question. Yeah, this to me is kind of a, I shudder to call it a no-brainer, but I don't know, it kind of hits me as that. The only issue is, what does it commit the town to do if it's a matter of having brochures, available or in town hall or a library, or even make a room available for an educational thing. I don't see that, as long as it's sponsored by a nonprofit. You know, I don't see that as you know, anything that would be controversial.
No, I
It's
thought-
something we should support.
Don't either.
I thought all Mr. Vogel's suggestions, I mean, we could have something on the website and
Yeah.
the brochures and, you know, if he and others want to do a educational seminar, that would be great.
Seems like the sort of thing League of Women Voters would be a perfect partner to hold some sort of educational program.
Yep. Again, you know, that would be in the future after the regulations have actually been
Sure.
voted upon, disseminated, and worked out how exactly there would be, people would be held to, for legal, I'm sorry, I've lost my words.
It is getting late. I think you can go home feeling that you're getting support from.
Great.
Well, not
Thank
yet,
you
not
very
yet. Let's
much.
see if there's any public comment first. It's a public hearing.
Just so, Workman's Circle is a national organization, Jewish cultural organization, and we have our office in the greater Boston area in Brookline. And we
We
have
have a
somewhere around
member.
500 to 600 members.
We have a member on our board.
Yes, I know. He and I have talked about this, as you might know. Sure.
Thank you. It's a public hearing. Anyone want to be heard on this matter?
Given the support of all of you, I'm not sure it's necessary for me to really speak up. But so I'm Laura Derman. I'm also a member of Workman's Circle, and I'm a resident on Lancaster Terrace. And I just wanted to say that, you know, it's a fabulous thing that the state has done this, but it feels like that's half the job, and the other half is educating community members, both the domestic workers and also the people that hire domestic workers. So if we can make this happen, I think that that is another great thing that this progressive town of ours can accomplish, and maybe be a model for other communities as well.
Thank you. Anyone else? Very good. We'll move on to warrant Article 19, you're welcome, which is a resolution opposing natural gas pipeline expansion and fracking. Good evening.
Good evening. Carol Oldham, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 11. Thank you for the opportunity to come and before the Select Board and talk to you about this important and timely issue. I first of all want to say that this warrant article is intended to be a general anti-fracking warrant article, so not just about a particular pipeline, but about hydrofracking and natural gas extraction in general. And it takes the current ill-conceived Kinder Morgan Tennessee gas pipeline project as an illustration for the need to move away from climate-polluting fossil fuels like fracked natural gas. And my co-sponsor on the warrant article, Ed Leckler, will go into more depth, but I wanted to just give a broad overview. So first of all, the pipeline is being built bigger than the demand that we currently have in the state, and much of the gas is therefore likely to go out of Massachusetts. There's no reason that our communities should assume the risk of spills and gas emissions for someone else to buy the fracked gas that's coming through our woods and our towns. For the portion of the gas that will be used to fill demand in Massachusetts, that demand can be met other ways. A study by the New England States Committee on Energy shows that energy efficiency can meet most of the demand for natural gas in Massachusetts. The study didn't even take into account the gas we could save by plugging the leaks in existing old pipelines in the Commonwealth, leaks which the Conservation Law Foundation estimates to lose between 8 and 12 billion cubic feet of natural gas annually. Brookline is home to many of these leaks. There's actually a map online that you can look at. And we have a grade 1 leak, which is the highest, the most significant kind, which is right on Route 9 near the old Lincoln School. And we have a lot of grade 2 leaks scattered throughout Brookline. Natural gas is also a major climate change polluter, which means that Brookline should particularly oppose this type of project with our excellent record of leadership on climate change. And climate change is only one reason that we need to move forward on renewable energy instead of locking Massachusetts into a dirty fossil fuel dependent future. In other words, we need to switch anyways. And it doesn't make sense to trample our conservation lands and backyards to build a project to move natural gas that we will need to stop using anyhow. So on this project, so far, 34 Massachusetts municipalities have resolutions in place to ban natural gas pipelines or in support of community rights or against transportation and storage of fracking-related materials. Our warrant article would be in solidarity with those towns along the route trying to say no on their own town lands. This project and fracking in general means conservation lands ruined, water polluted, homeowners' concerns ignored, people's health put at risk, and towns being railroaded. On the other hand, your vote for this warrant article would represent support for the right-of-way towns who oppose this project and would be taking a stand against fracking. Thank you.
Good evening. Thanks for listening. My name's Ed Leckler. I'm a town meeting member from Precinct 8. So I'm the numbers guy, and I wanted to augment two things that Carol presented. First, Carol said that demand can be met in other ways, and I just want to mention a few of them and say something about the numbers. We have an existing Portland natural gas transportation system. It's a pipeline. And they've indicated that they can increase their throughput by about 7 to 8%, which would substantially take the place of the 500 to 600 million cubic feet per day that we're projecting as a shortfall. That would be at least 70% of the shortfall. A modest investment in the existing Quebec hydro power lines can lead to improvements of another 10%. And conservation, as Carol mentioned, of our antiquated natural gas pipe systems and the tremendous leakage there could take care of another 10%. And so we're already up to 90% of what this pipeline would be bringing in. And that's not to mention other renewables and home insulation and other means as well. The second point I want to address was Carol mentioned that natural gas is a major climate change polluter. In a strict theoretical sense, natural gas actually gives you more BTUs per CO2 output than either a coal by 40% and oil by 25%. However, natural gas is mostly methane, and methane is itself a greenhouse gas. In fact, it's 30 to 80 times worse as a greenhouse gas on a molar basis than carbon dioxide itself. And the problem is that during recovery and distribution, methane leaks. And a study carried out by Robert Howarth, who's a biogeochemist at Cornell, in 2007, for the first time, tried to analyze well, how much leakage goes on, both in fracking and in conventional ways of acquiring methane, and what would the impact be on climate change. And since then, there have been numerous other studies, but he published a meta-analysis just this year in 2014. And he concluded, I'll just get to the bottom line, that natural gas is actually 2 times worse than either coal or oil in terms of its greenhouse gas impact when you consider fracked natural gas. And conventional natural gas is 1.4 times worse than coal or oil. So we don't need the pipeline. There are viable alternatives to get the gas we need. We don't want the pipeline because natural gas will have a horrible impact on climate change, and so we want to minimize any new sources in that regard. Now, Kinder Morgan has every right to want to promote a pipeline for their short-term company interests. but someone has to promote a responsible long-term interest of the planet. And so we have to be the parents to Kinder Morgan's children, and make sure that even though they may want more candy, that we have to tell them that no, that they've got too much, and it's not only bad for them, but it's bad for the planet as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions from board members? Selectman Franco?
I have a question. So I hear your environmental arguments and your arguments about the sort of infrastructure problems that exist in the current gas pipelines. But I want to press you a little bit on this contention that there's enough, that renewable energy can sort of fill the need, the gap here. Gas is the most common source of energy in New England, as I understand it, and I understand that limited gas pipeline has led to higher electricity prices, that home heating gas service is unavailable to some people in the western part of the state. There was an article in the Globe about that earlier this month on October 4th. So it seems to me that more capacity might be a solution to some problems here, and we're talking about taking a stand against the gas pipeline. I want to know sort of your thoughts on.
Yeah, well, I mentioned actually 5 different ways that this can be addressed. The first is by increasing the amount of natural gas that's actually going through existing transportation systems. And of course, that's a short-term solution, but in terms of price problems, that is the main short-term solution. But there was also the hydropower coming from Quebec using existing lines, not building, we're not talking about the new lines that are of concern, which will also have a significant impact. And then there are other ways as well. For example, there are ways of storing liquid natural gas, and there's more potential capacity there. Again, it's a short-term solution of making sure that there's enough natural gas now in order to solve those sort of short-term concerns that you've described. There are other things as well. Right. But in the long term, of course, we do want renewables, and we do want more insulation, and we do want that conservation. But there are plenty of solutions in the short term that don't require a new pipeline.
I guess what has me scratching my head, and this is something we should probably connect about offline, is if there is an existing problem where people can't get service, why isn't there some action to increase the amount of gas flowing through an existing pipeline?
I would be, I don't want to address that because I don't know.
Okay.
But I think that it requires, I won't press it.
Well, and I would just say, just as a quick note, that these folks in the Western, and I didn't read the article, to be perfectly honest, but the folks in Western Massachusetts who are not able to get gas service, this pipeline is actually not serving Western Massachusetts. It's going through Western Massachusetts, but it's serving Eastern Massachusetts. Okay. So this wouldn't actually help them anyways.
I'm very curious if somebody can tell me what's in Dracut. Why would it stop there?
That is an excellent question, which I do not know the answer to.
Okay, because if it were to be exported, I mean, if the idea was it was going to go someplace else, Dracut is not the place where I would expect it to stop.
Right. I think Clint knows the answer.
It's Clint? Sort of a dead end.
You want to come up, Clint? Do you know?
Yeah. Clint Richmond, Precinct 6. Yeah, Dracut's a connection point for various spokes of gas transmission. It's a big terminal.
There is a terminal in Drake that redirects.
They want to bring it into Drake so then you can distribute it throughout the region to other pipelines.
Okay, which is a little different from the assertion that it's going to be exported.
Some of the pipelines that are fed from Drake go to Boston Harbor, I believe, and the various LNG or gas facilities for exporting gas.
I thought gas comes in.
It can,
I mean, are we importers of gas? Do we export?
Well, it could go out. Apparently, it doesn't right now.
Right, but the infrastructure to transmit the gas for export already exists. They just need to get it to Drake it. I mean, I don't know if you want to hear my testimony, but one of the reasons this pipeline is being built is to bring fracked gas from Pennsylvania, or to at least provide more gas for our region so they could send the fracked gas elsewhere. I mean, one of the reasons to oppose this pipeline is that it's really, and even all natural gas usage today is basically supporting fracking, because that's what's keeping the price low. So there's currently a ban, I believe, on exporting natural gas, but the natural gas industry, because there's so much fracked gas available, they want to lift that.
Well,
So
I'm aware of that ban, which is part of why I didn't understand what happens if how it would be exported.
I'm not a total expert on this, but that's my understanding, that Drake is a hub. The hub connects the ports, and the gas can be exported once it gets to Drake.
Assuming it were to be allowed legally to be exported, which it is not.
Right, but the main issue.
Well, they may be, but they may or may not get approvals. I just want to be real clear about what I'm somewhat concerned about the impact on energy availability in the region. Not that I'm in favor of fracking. It seems to me fracking is pretty appalling. So I'm not saying that that's a justification, but it is not a simple, straightforward thing, and there is definitely no alternative available that will substitute as an energy source for the New England area.
In the short run,
well, what's short? Tell me.
I might disagree
what's
with
long
that,
and what's short?
I think maybe one of the graphs that the team might prepare is something that shows the increase and the percentage of natural gas as a market share within energy production in New England. It's been going like this while oil's been going down. The gas industry subsidizes switching from oil to gas, and it was even in our climate action plan in 2000 to say if we were able to switch facilities from oil to natural gas, that was beneficial for the climate. But I think, as you heard Dr. Leckler say, that's no longer the case, because it's based on the assumption that the per unit of energy, natural gas is less harmful on a carbon basis than oil or coal. But that's no longer the assumption under these new analyses.
I feel a little betrayed because I switched at home to natural gas based on what somebody from the Climate Action Committee was telling me at the time.
Likewise.
So, yeah.
Same. I did the exact same.
Yeah, and in 2000, fracking was not really an issue. I mean, it's been growing astronomically recently, and it's the reason that the price of natural gas is low and makes the switch attractive. Half the reason people are switching is not because they care so much about the climate, it's because they really care about the price they pay for, winter heat. And we have to say, basically you're voting for fracking by switching and using as much natural gas as you can. And as a large consuming community, it's important for Brookline to make a statement that says, look, we use the natural gas and we don't think it's a good idea.
I'd like to ask a question about fracking. And by the way, my question is not, don't consider it a challenge. It's a test. I want to make sure I understand. I'm by no means an expert on this, and I actually think, I'm actually hopeful that as we discuss this further, we'll get some people with different positions to test this stuff for us. But my understanding about fracking and its damage to groundwater was that nobody knew the answer, that there was a valid debate about whether fracking was damaging to groundwaters. Has that debate been settled? Do you know?
Ed, do you want to answer that, or Carol? I mean, I'll take a whack at it if you want, but.
I mean, there are certainly many clear instances of it contaminating.
I mean, what I've heard, and this is old information, was that the fracking goes on far below where groundwater comes from, but you tell me. Like I said, I'm not an expert. I'm just wondering if that debate's been resolved.
Well, I think that there are different studies and different conclusions from the different studies, because there is no one place in the country where it's going on and one way it's being done, et cetera. But the last revealing study was in Pennsylvania, and it was something that had been covered up. Now, I didn't come prepared to talk about this, but there were the equivalent of the Environmental Protection Agency of Pennsylvania released a report that they actually were pressured into releasing, where they presented 340, that's what my recollection is, but I don't remember, I'm not sure of the number, but a substantial number of examples that they have documented where fracking facilities had contaminated groundwater. There were 340, or something like that. And so as more studies have been done, as has been looked at more carefully, one finds more and more examples of that kind of problem. And then there was another state, and I've forgotten what the other state was, that had a similar study released about the same time. This is a couple months ago. But I don't remember that state, and I don't remember the numbers from that state. It wasn't as dramatic as Pennsylvania.
All right. Yeah, I mean, that does sound dramatic. On the other hand, you know, compared to what, and I wish that there was, that we knew.
Well, one part of this,
to a certainty.
of this resolution actually calls on disallowing the storage of fracking materials or fracking waste. So even though Massachusetts may not be at the top of the charts in terms of natural gas production, although it is a possibility in the Connecticut Valley, they would like to explore there, but it may happen. But it's specifically addressing that issue that the chemicals and the chemical waste is toxic, and we don't want it stored within Massachusetts too. So there's that piece of it. I mean, I think it's pretty well agreed that the materials are toxic. There's some secrecy around that, and the industry has been fighting, as you know, revealing any of the ingredients. So it's a little hard to talk about the toxicity, but I mean, I think that is indicative of, you know, of that kind of secrecy is not just a business rationale. I think it's that they really don't want too much examination. It's specifically exempted from the water control rules of the EPA that was introduced, I believe, by Mr. Cheney during his era.
Do you have any indication whether we're likely to hear from any proponents about this, so that we can, you know, have a two-sided conversation? And not that I don't trust it, what you guys are saying, but I just feel like that this is above my head and above the head of a lot of people, and I'd really like to know what the counterpoint to it is. And perhaps there is none.
Are you asking us to find a proponent?
No, I'm not asking you to find it. I'm just questioning.
I'm trying to figure out what we would do to help in that
That's
regard.
Not your job to do that. Maybe it's somebody in town government's job to do that.
There's a lot of material put forth by the petitioner of the pipeline, and there's an FERC, you know, submission that you're welcome to study to, you know, look at the rationale for the pipeline there. There's other issues. There's another whereas clause that, you know, part of this is just to make money on gas distribution, because they could actually bill the whole project back to the ratepayers. So as consumers, we could actually be paying for, in Brookline, so this is to bring it home, that we could actually be subsidizing the creation of this pipeline, which, as you've heard, may be unnecessary totally based on demand.
I don't have a personal reason to question what your assertions. I just feel like this is beyond my expertise to evaluate it. But
Well, in September, apparently, somebody's quoted as saying EPA has a study underway that will be more definitive. It's just not done yet.
all right,
That's on the groundwater.
Yeah.
on the groundwater
Yeah.
issue, but there's more. Obviously, there's a lot more issues, and it's
Sure.
it's such
Yeah.
it's such a area of expertise, including your own, and I feel inadequate to understand it without hearing the other side.
I could at least provide the Howarth article articles about the 340 cases of contamination in Pennsylvania, and a few more articles, if that would be of interest. I could provide them, you know.
Great. That'd be great.
One other thing I might add is that as part of the educational outreach with regard to this warrant article, we're going to be showing the film Gasland, not that that's obviously a pro-pipeline film, but that we'll have some, we'll touch upon that issue in particular.
All right. We do need to move along, and it's a public hearing. Anybody else want to be heard on this matter, which is warrant article 19? Nope. Then we're going to move along and note that our discussion of warrant article 11 has been postponed for this evening, and we will now take up agenda item. I'm sorry?
Go to 8.
Go to 8?
Because that's what people are here for.
Okay, very good. So I'll take out of order. We'll go to agenda item 10, and first is a review and possible vote on warrant article 8, that's disorderly conduct warrant article that the police chief has sponsored.
Only 2 hours late.
And I see Ms. Correa's here and can enlighten us on the constitutional basis for that.
Hi, I'm Patty Correa, Associate Town Council. I understand that some questions came up at last week's hearing. I prepared a memo explaining each change and explaining the various cases that support each change. In short, what happened was, in the last 45 years or so, the Supreme Judicial Court has issued decisions based on Supreme Court cases as well that have ruled certain words in the state disorderly statute, which is very similar to ours, overbroad and vague. And the result is that that language is not enforceable, and leaving it in the disorderly bylaw, if followed and misinterpreted by a police officer, could steer the town in the wrong direction and expose us to liability. So the concerns were raised a year ago in connection with the May annual town meeting. Stanley Spiegel and Nancy Heller suggested some different amendments, but it drew attention to the bylaw in general, and a number of people pointed out that there were some verbiage in the and some wording in our bylaw that the SJC has said is not constitutional, and suggested eliminating it then, but it was too late in terms of the warrant season, and the moderator ruled it outside the scope. So as I understood it, the task was left to town council's office to perhaps look at it and come back with something, some fix. And that's really all this warrant article proposes to do.
Good. I read your memo, and it helped me understand the constitutional basis for this, and hopefully it settled the mind of the people who we heard from at our last discussion of this, who wanted to better understand where this came from. Board members have questions?
Yeah, well, I was one of the people that was raising an issue the last time, and I've read through your memo. Thank you very much, very thorough. And you cite a Massachusetts case which talks about in Commonwealth versus Orlando, while abusive language in some circumstances may constitute protected speech when uttered, such speech may be constitutionally prescribed when loudly uttered late at night in a residential neighborhood so that people in the privacy of their homes are unable to avoid the noise. And my concern was the sentence in 8.5.1 in which you said, this definition of disorderly shall only relate to activities that involve no lawful exercise of First Amendment right. And I'm still a little concerned that we're not giving proper notice to people that if you're screaming about a First Amendment issue, but you're screaming in the middle of the night and waking up all your neighbors, I mean, I think we need to give people notice that you're not considering that a lawful exercise, right?
So,
and I'm just a little worried that the way this, if somebody went and read this before they started screaming in the middle of the night, they might not feel that they've been properly warned.
I think that the first part of 8.5.1 addresses that certain conduct is not allowed. Noisy conduct is not allowed, disruptive conduct is not allowed, violent, tumultuous conduct is not allowed. And so the sentence was, is now part of the legal definition of disorderly conduct after the Orlando case. That is part of the jury instruction, that's part of the interpretation. And this verbiage is right out of that case. It's almost block copy verbatim. So it was just in the interest of cleaning up this bylaw to make it reflect the law, I added it. It's now part of the legal definition. So that's the explanation for why that's there. And I think lawful exercise, I understand your point, hopefully in the context of the entire section, spelling out the various forms of disruptive, unacceptable conduct, it'll have meaning.
I'm just telling you, if I was representing somebody who'd been screaming in the middle of the night and some political issue, I would certainly say that they were covered by that last sentence and therefore could not be prosecuted.
I think there are a number of cases that the lawyer should consult to see what kind of conduct is reached. I mean, there are lots of examples of loud, disruptive conduct that illustrate that kind of conduct is not allowed.
Right.
Board members, questions? Members of the public want to be heard on this. Mr. Rosenthal, perhaps?
Yes, please. Thank you.
Just remember, it's late.
I'll speak fast again. Marty Rosenthal, various things in my past, but I actually, by coincidence, was the lawyer in the Orlando case.
Okay.
So I have a particular interest in this bylaw, and I really commend Patty Correa and Chief O'Leary for what they've done here, and it was, I think, we in PACS that urged that this be done, that when the bylaw was amended in 2013, we said, wonderful, allow non-criminal, help the neighborhood, but clean up the bylaw, and now Patty has done a really wonderful job and wrote a better memo than I could have written. And basically it tracks the case law, including the Orlando case, which I lost, and they said, here's what the statute always meant. And they redefined it, and now that definition is part of the law for disturbing the peace, and it's what Patty put into this bylaw. So, I know when to fold my cards, and, it wasn't worth going to the U.S. Supreme Court. It was the federal Supreme Court that started changing all this in the early 70s, and the public defenders were challenging disorderly person, and that's where a lot of this came from. And then in 77, I did disturbing the peace, and that's what happened. So this tracks case law. It cleans everything up. As to Nancy's question, there's nothing you can do to be perfectly clear in this kind of stuff. You're in areas that get close to protected activity. Sometimes they get protected activity. There are cases that should not be protected activity that were deemed unconstitutionally prosecuted because the law wasn't clear enough, like that juvenile case was one. So perfection is going to be the enemy of the good in this, and all we can do is track case law and leave it to the police to do their best to balance these difficult questions of First Amendment and so forth. So I hope you'll support this. I support it, and I'm hoping PACS will support it. And it can be nitpicked to death, which the public hearing of the advisory committee was doing a little bit tonight, and they supported it unanimously. But everybody has issues. What about this? What about that? Can't we cover this? Can't we cover that? There's only so much you can do with this bylaw. I'm done.
All right, and I'm sorry to keep going, but I do understand Selectman Daley's concern, so I have a question, sort of a hypothetical. Let's say there's Occupy Brookline going on, and it's midnight, and it is happening in the parking area outside of Town Hall, but also is where there are people living across the street, and they would be disturbed. Is that disorderly conduct, or is it protected?
Nobody knows.
There's really no bright lines in this stuff. I mean, a lot of times what happens is the police will act to protect the neighborhood, and it'll go to court, and can be in court for years trying to answer your question, and it probably depends who's on the state Supreme Court when it gets decided. And if it goes to the U.S. Supreme Court nowadays, it's going to be, guilty without looking.
Right.
So there's no easy answer to, a lot of these are difficult questions.
Okay, and I appreciate
exactly
that.
what was being said at the moment when the police took action. There's
Right.
too many gray
Right, and there
areas.
may be 6 versions of that, a Rashomon case. I mean,
Yeah, I would just add that if you're exercising your First Amendment free speech rights in an extremely loud fashion at 2 in the morning in a residential neighborhood, that probably wouldn't be protected.
right. I would agree with that.
Okay, thank you.
I'm ready to move this with a recommendation of affirmative action myself. Anybody
Is
have
Ms.
any-
Heller here to speak on this one?
Oh, I'm sorry, Ms. Heller, she is here.
Good evening, Nancy Heller, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 8. I, as one of the original petitioners a couple of years ago on this warrant article on disorderly conduct, I'm supportive of what the police chief is trying to do here. I support what Marty says. I think that the changes do track the law. We had an inkling at the time that there were some problems, and trusted in the process to clean it up, and that's happened. So that's good.
Excellent, thank you. All right, anyone else? I'm now ready to move this. I'd like to make the motion that the Board of Selectmen recommend favorable action on warrant article number 8. All those in favor, say aye. Selectman Daley?
Aye.
Selectman DeWitt?
Aye.
Selectman Waschinsky?
Aye.
Selectman Franco?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Thank you, Patty. We can go, let's take warrant article 17, resolution pertaining to town lighting. And I don't think the petition is here to speak about this. Anyone have?
We heard this last.
Yeah.
We heard it
Yeah.
last week. We
Right.
haven't moved it yet. We don't have to move it tonight.
Well, I'm ready.
You ready to move it?
Made a pretty persuasive case.
Okay. Why don't you make the motion then?
Then I move that the Board of Selectmen recommend favorable action on Article 17.
All in favor of Selectman DeWitt's motion, say aye. Selectman Daley?
Aye.
Selectman DeWitt?
Aye.
Selectman Waschinsky?
Aye.
Selectman Franco?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. And we'll go back to agenda item number 9, which is a vote on Article 1 of the special town meeting within the special town meeting.
I feel like we voted this
Yeah,
one multiple times
No, I
already.
know,
We
it's-
voted everything but the article, I think.
Voted to call.
No, I think we did.
We voted we voted no action on the other article. I
No,
remember.
but earlier.
Yeah, I made this point last
we'll do it
Thursday.
again. Okay,
and,
okay. All right, fine.
Let's just do
I'm told
it.
we haven't done
Voting
it,
it.
so I move favorable action on Article number 1 for the special town meeting within the special town meeting of November 18th, namely that we name the athletic field at Cypress Street Playground the Thomas P. Hennessy Fields at Cypress Street Playground. Any question or comment before I put it to a vote? All in favor, say aye. Selectman Daley?
Aye.
Selectman DeWitt?
Aye.
Selectman Waschinsky?
Aye.
Selectman Franco?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. And that concludes our business for this evening. Thank you all very much.